If we could come to order, please. Final warning, coming to order. Good evening, welcome, councillors, officers. No members of the public in the chamber this evening, but those that may be joining us via the webcast. Welcome to this meeting of Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee here at Maidstone. That being today, February the 6th, 2018. Before we start, I'll just point out to you that we do not expect any fire drills this evening, so should we hear the alarm, please follow the instructions of Ms Tunnicliffe, who sits to my right. She will give us instruction of how to safely evacuate the building. I'd also like to advise you that the Council is webcasting the meeting this evening, but if anybody else is intending to record, perhaps you'd be kind enough just to make us aware, not to prevent you, but just so that everybody in the chamber is in the knowledge that that is taking place. Nobody indicates. Thank you. We'll start immediately with apologies. I think we have apologies from Councillor de Wigenden. Are there any others? That'll take me to notification of substitute members, please.
Councillor Burton in for Councillor de Wigenden.
Thank you. Other than that, I think we're full house. Item 3, urgent items. There is one urgent update which has been circulated, and it contains a further recommendation for agenda item 17, so I've agreed that we'll accept that as an urgent update paper. Trust you've all had a chance to read that. I'll take notification of visiting members, please. If I could trouble you to come to the microphone, announce yourself and indicate if there are any items that you would like to speak on.
Hello, members. Dennis Spooner, Bearsted Ward, just here to observe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Councillor Borson for item 17.
Thank you. I've also received notice that Councillor Hastie intends to join us and is reserving her right to speak on item 17. At item 5, I'll take disclosures by members and officers, please. Are there any disclosures? No indications, none noted. Disclosures of lobbying? Councillor English.
I've been lobbied by certain members of my group, including Councillor Brian Clark, on item 17.
Thank you. Councillor Cox, ditto. Councillor Willis, ditto. Councillor Matt Burton, Councillor Mrs Prendergast, Councillor Mrs Springett, all indicating the same. We'll note that. Thank you. Item 7, we have no yellow papers this evening, so I propose that everything be taken in open session. Is that agreed? We could next deal with the minutes of our last meeting held on the 22nd of January. Circulated in full with the agendas. I trust you've had a chance to peruse those. Does anybody wish to raise any issues of accuracy? Since nobody has any issues with accuracy, may I take your approval to sign those as an accurate copy? Is that agreed, members? Thank you. Item 9, presentation of petitions. No petitions this evening. Item 10, questions and answers. No questions received this evening. Item 11 is the committee work programme. This is for noting. Thank you. Councillor Cox, sorry, I didn't hear you.
It seems quite abridged in my minutes. I don't think we've got the whole of it here for some reason.
You've got special printing, have you? Right. Okay, but that's noted. Are there any verbal updates from members who are directly instructed by this committee to represent on outside bodies? Councillor English.
This isn't an update, it's a question. At what point are we changing this? Because we did agree that because of the decision of the Democracy Committee to retain certain outside bodies, that we would change this into a written update form with submissions of
It's
any
my
written...
understanding that I think the matter goes to full council to have a standardised agreement as to how this is going to be conducted across all committees. So that's a fairly imminent
Okay,
meeting.
fine. There was a meeting, there was a meeting in the Community Rail Partnership, but the discussion was mostly about the Swale line, so there wasn't anything greatly relevant to this council, because it covers both the Medway Valley line and the Swale line, as you probably know.
Indeed. Okay, that's noted. We'll move on then. Agenda item 13. This is a referral from Planning Committee. You've all had a chance to read it. I would like to suggest a course of action, and then I'll speak.
Before you do, Mr. Chairman, may I just interject very briefly and say the recommendation is not quite correct.
As Chair of Planning Committee, would you like to explain that a little more?
The reference was specifically about affordable housing for gypsy and travellers. That is sort of covered in the body of the text supporting it, but the recommendation could be interpreted to mean, and I would interpret it as written, to be talking about all gypsy and travellers, and that is not what the issue that the committee was concerned about. The committee was specifically talking about provision of affordable housing across the non-settled community. So I think the recommendation needs to reflect that. The body of the report implies that, but it doesn't actually state it. And it is an important distinction.
Okay, so I think the recommendation, or the referral as presented, is actually correct. Your unmet demand for affordable gypsy and traveller sites is the referral. Is that not the context?
The recommendation, and it is not the body of texts and reports we adopt in this committee, it's recommendations. And the recommendation omits the word affordable. And it needs to include it.
That was the recommendation of Planning Committee. Right, okay. Well, my suggestion as the way forwards here is, I think CHE, Community Housing Committee, have as big a part to play in this matter as ourselves, and that we share this referral with them also. And I would suggest that the appropriate course forwards is that we include this recommendation within the work for the review of the local plan. That's my suggestion. So, Councillor English.
I think that would be correct in relation to this committee's work. I would say that when CHE look at it, there is a second element to this, which probably isn't relevant to this committee, but when CHE look at it, I think they also do need to look at the operational housing aspects of this. Obviously, that's why they'd be looking at it, and that might be in advance. There are issues that might come forward before the local plan. Now, it's obviously for them to look at, and I'm content that your wording covers this committee's role, but just to flag up when it goes to communities, housing and the environment, their role is different.
I think
it might be in advance of the local plan.
Correct to say it's not directly relevant to this committee, and perhaps we should make our own individual petitions to CHE when indeed they look at it, and to convey that to them. Councillor Mrs. Prendergast.
I'm sorry, my observations were more for the officers making a note to pass on the referral to see.
Well, I'm making that as a formal recommendation that we share it with them, pass it to them as well. It's not included in the motion as I've put it to you, and I would recommend put it separately then. Councillor Mrs. Prendergast.
I fully support what you've said, that it should go to CHE, and obviously we need to look at it in the round during the review. But I was discussing this with Mr. Jarman this morning. I found some sort of EU Ministers' Committee notes which suggest that we should be ensuring that we have a spread of traveller accommodation across the borough rather than, any sort of perceived segregation, perception of forming ghettos, mostly in rural areas. So perhaps we could address this. I will pass this on to you shortly, but also in urban areas, because I'm sure if you look at the local plan allocations as they currently stand, that there could be some questions raised about equalities and diversity in terms of where the sites are going. So I'm not saying that I know what the answers are, but I'm just saying it's worth considering. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a seconder for the motion? As it, Councillor Mumford. Thank you. So if I take that to the vote, and that's that we cross-refer this to CHE and include the work in our local plan review. Those in favour, please. That's unanimous, therefore carried. Councillor English.
It's just a question of a procedure, Mr. Chairman. At what point do the very important points which Councillor Prendergast has effectively just referred to about the appropriate approach to housing policy get mentioned in a referral somewhere? If we're looking as a committee to ask CHE to look at the housing aspects of it, shouldn't we be mentioning the fact that the concern that was raised at planning committee was very directly about affordable housing and addressing the equalities agenda, which includes the points that Councillor Prendergast has effectively made about the spread of, shall we call it, affordable or social housing or whatever, because I do think there's a danger of that point simply being overlooked.
I think there's a danger that we make this so prescriptive that we've tied up exactly what we want ourselves to do in the future. And I think the way I intended the motion is that the recommendation, the referral as it's come to us, will be dealt with within our process of reviewing all of those relevant policies in the local plan review, which is back to that collect the evidence, consider the matter, draft the policy. And I would like to think that all of those things that you've mentioned, of course, will be included, because hopefully some of us will be sat there making sure that that is the case. Mr. Jarman.
Yeah, sorry, just add to that, Chairman. We did look at this very issue. Sarah looked at it in some detail, and unfortunately, we just could not put together an evidence base for this component of affordable need, unlike with bricks and mortar affordable, where we can identify the need for affordable rent, for, by number of bedrooms, etc., etc. We just can't get into that grain with the Gypsy and Traveller community, despite trying to engage the two councils.
To build on that, we would try to, obviously next time round when we're doing a Gypsy Traveller accommodation assessment, we would try to find that information again.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a given. Councillor Mrs Prendergast, are you still wishing to speak? You're finished? Councillor English, your hand went up then.
Can I just ask you to actually send something back to the planning committee as well as to CHE following this referral, because I think planning committee may need to make a specific further request of CHE if this committee is not going to make a note of the issues that I've been touching on. So could this committee also send a note back to planning committee saying what they haven't been able to
I'll
do?
ask the clerk to share a note of the minute of this item with the planning committee for their agenda, and then planning committee can see how they see fit to deal with it. Right, we'll move on if we can, please. Having dealt with 13, we're on 14. This is the third quarter budget monitoring report, and I'll turn to Ms Dunne to introduce this for us.
Thank you. So this report sets out revenue and capital expenditure against the budget for the first 3 quarters of the year for the services which fall within the remit of this committee. Following previous requests, we've now separated out the presentation of the position for planning services and transportation and parking services so that you can see the position on each of those areas separately. Overall, on planning services, we're currently projecting a positive variance for the end of the year. Now, that's a change in the position from the second quarter, and that's due to changes in our assumptions around the timing of costs relating to development control appeals. The projections were reached in consultation with colleagues from planning and the relevant budget managers, and this is something that will be monitored closely over the final quarter. If required, we will make a provision for the potential future costs before the end of the year. Parking and transportation services continuing to show an overall positive variance, currently projected to reach 265,000 by the end of the year. So the report details the variances over 30,000 at the table in paragraph 2.6, and the appendices set out the detailed position in each area. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Mrs Springer.
Thank you. It wasn't really a question, it's just a comment really. On the spatial planning policy section, it says there are currently vacant posts in the section, but these will shortly be filled by temporary staff. I was a bit disappointed that we're still carrying on with temporary staff, and I appreciate it's not a question for that. It's just a wish to raise a comment that I'm saddened to see we're still going for temporary staff and not trying to get permanent staff to fill the vacant posts. Just a comment.
Just for some clarity in that regard, members, I'm pleased to say that actually we are going for permanent staff. We've just had a one-off situation in this regard to do with sickness and a long lead-in for recruiting another permanent member of staff. So we're just gap-filling at the moment, but it'll be fine.
Firstly, I would like to just say to officers, thank you for separating out that parking income and the planning costs, because I think that does give us a much better perspective when we're actually looking at these fairly big numbers that sometimes cancel each other out but are quite clearly different matters. So thank you for doing that. I'm personally still very concerned that, and I have spoken with officers about this, the timing of when accruals present themselves for some of these appeal costs may give us a false sense of, aren't we doing extremely well predicting an underspend? So I think we do need to keep a very, very close eye on that. And I think there's further report update going to P&R that may give us an opportunity to look at. Is that right?
Yeah, at a corporate level, we are proposing that the risk of additional future costs is recognised. That's not reflected within this area because that's a corporate provision for potential future legal costs. If we decide it's appropriate to do so, then this committee may well see that come back in the final quarter of the year.
Right, so that's the reassurance, I think, that somebody is looking at that a little bit more carefully. So thank you. Members, we're just asked to note these reports. Are they noted? Thank you. Thank you. Right, we're doing extremely well here. We're already at item 15. This is the review of air quality monitoring in Maidstone. And Dr Maxwell, you're going to start us off, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. Members will be aware that there's been no continuous monitoring in the town centre since June 2016, when the Fairmeadow station was closed to make way for the roadworks there. Officers, I think, already were keen to see that station relocated anyway, and we've had diffusion tubes around the town centre for many years, which were indicating that the air quality in Upper Stone Street was a cause for concern. So we wanted to move the station to that area. We identified a privately owned site outside Miller Heights and spent a long time in drawing up a lease agreement. Unfortunately, the property owner decided to sell the property and didn't want the new owner to be encumbered by that lease agreement, so that all fell through. We have identified a new site in Upper Stone Street outside the Jubilee Church, and I've heard today from KCC that they are happy for us to use that site, which is good news. However, we still envisage some delays with establishing a site there because KCC had promised originally as part of the agreement to build a base for the site that's a concrete base, and we don't know when that will be done, how long it would take, and we still aren't clear whether they will still require a lease agreement. We are therefore proposing as an interim measure, in order to get something established quickly, that we engage a contractor to do some monitoring. The contractors typically use much smaller cabins than we do, and therefore they have a bigger choice of sites. We've been discussing this with the contractor who does our maintenance and repairs for our existing equipment across the Mid-Kent shared service, and they could provide really a fully operated monitoring station, which means they do all the calibrations, the repairs, deal with any breakdowns. They would include PM 2.5, which we don't have an instrument for, so we would have that as well. And it would be something, the ballpark figure is 16,000, but we actually know that there would be some discount because there would be a slight saving because the Fairmeadow site was included in the original contract. So our recommendation to members is that we crack on with doing the monitoring using a contractor as an interim measure, and the results of that monitoring, perhaps over a 12-month period, will be used to inform decisions about future monitoring in the area.
That's excellent. Thank you. I'll start on this one, if I may. This came out of the Air Quality Working Group. Having, as chairman, faced questions regarding the reinstatement of the air quality monitoring station a number of times at this committee, and I think also at full council, when we turned to the discussion about this, obviously it was something that I was very keen to pursue, and it materialised very quickly that we didn't have any certainty of providing the continual monitoring in the short term because of the land issues that the officer has mentioned. So, officers did some work on it, came back with this proposal for a temporary contracted monitoring so that we can actually deliver some real data into our thinking in the short term, which I think is badly what's needed. In particular, there's the addition of PM 2.5 data, which our existing station wouldn't be capable of doing anyway. So, unashamedly, I'd like to definitely move recommendation number 1 and recommendation number 2, but with an addition that a further report come back to this committee before establishing the site, which I think ties in with what Dr. Maxwell was suggesting, that the monitoring will inform what we actually want to do with a permanent site or otherwise moving forwards. And thank you. And that is, because once we've collected data from that point, one might assume there's a degree of consistency, and it might then be interesting to move that mobile facility somewhere else and actually start to map a whole picture. So thank you very much to officers for getting this option to us. I've moved with that amendment. I think Councillor English has seconded. Councillor Willis, you're indicating to speak, and then I'll come to you. Councillor English.
Fantastic. I'm not brilliant with procedures. This really does need to be done, but a couple of questions I've got for the officer, if that's okay. Just to understand, PM10, which we have been monitoring but haven't been for a period of time, physically affects lungs, is that right? And PM 2.5 is the more unknown particulate, small, that affects bloodstream and can get into your brain. Is that the, just so people know what the difference in the.
Could you check your microphone, please?
The current thinking is that PM 2.5 is so small that it can actually go through the walls of the lungs into the bloodstream, and I think they now think that that's probably the most dangerous pollutant, and they're saying there's no, excuse me, no safe level of PM 2.5. Just to be clear, we don't have a statutory obligation to measure PM 2.5, but we think it's a good thing to do. That's why we've asked the contractor to include it in the package.
Excellent. I think that gets us ahead of the wave there. Again, Councillor Willis?
I don't. If I'm talking out of procedure here and I'm asking cheeky questions, but it can only save us money. If one, you mentioned about existing contractor giving you this, someone's worked outside the box and worked out another way of doing it, so congratulate whoever did that, and you've looked at a price. I'm probably asking a stupid question, but will we be able to go out and look at market prices or to tender to try and see if we can save some money off this £17,000? Sorry.
I have already done that informally. I've asked 3 contractors to quote. The other 2 quotes that I had came out around about the 30,000 mark. And the contractor, because he manages the contract and the maintenance contract for the whole of the Mid-Kent shared service, is routinely in this area doing other things. So he would, unlike other contractors, he wouldn't have to make special visits to the area.
Okay, on the other point of that, again, I welcome that the work's been done, fantastic. Again, if I'm sticking my nose in on procedure, I'm prepared to be corrected. But bear in mind, we're going to rent something, a service, for a year, but the main part of that rental is the actual hardware, probably. The actual, the measuring station. No, it's not. Let me ask a question. Is of that £17,000, I'm trying to see if we can save any money. Of the £17,000, is the majority of it the hardware?
Councillor Mrs. Strick, we'll come to you in a moment if you wish. I think what Councillor Willis is asking a question, and because I think what the officer is about to tell you is that there's obviously the maintenance of the site, the data collection, the data analysis, and it's a whole package of finished results that we're getting. And personally, I think we should just get on with this. We've been promising Maidstone this for so long, and the officers are looking at better and further alternatives into the future. We'll get a further report. I think we should be satisfied with that. Final word.
If we're thinking of continuing to use this, because you're asking for a report to come back about what we do next, could we get an option on buying title of the hardware at the end of the year's service so we can get a better deal next year?
Sorry. Already agreed that with the contractor if that's what members decide they want to do.
Councillor English.
I'm glad you moved the amendment to the recommendation to, Mr. Chairman, because clearly it may well be that with a more flexible set of kit and measuring things that our current equipment can't actually measure, that the arrangement with this contractor, probably, or others, if it do prove to be cheaper, although I find that unlikely given the price, that we actually are looking at longer than a year's contract in due course. So it's good to have that flexibility, shall we say, built into the reporting mechanism, because obviously the results that come in will have a bearing on what we seek to do. So I welcome your proposal, which sort of preempted what I had to say. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And like you, I'm anxious that we get on with it and fill this rather important gap in our information strategy.
Very happy to assist you in providing this data for your High Street residents, Councillor. Mr. Hayes, you want to add?
Thank you, Chair. It was just about the bringing back of the follow-up report and the potential to continue with a contractor to monitor the to do all of the duties for us. In terms of the timing, it would probably be better to bring that report sort of not after a full year, but towards the end of the year, so that there's time to progress with actually implementing this decision before the contract runs out. And in terms of continuing the contract for longer than the year, one of the main reason that we're able to fund this contract out of existing budget is that the overall data handling contract for the whole of the county was relet this year for a far lower price than it previously had been, and the budget for this year was set based upon the previous contract price, and so next year I'd say it's likely that our budget would be reduced accordingly to what we now know that the next 2 to 3 years contract will be. So I just want to just sort of bring that in that we're unlikely to have that extra money.
I think you're flagging up the risk of future budget availability to continue this work. I think that's worthy of us adding a further recommendation. Perhaps should this go to P&R, or do we incorporate it in our last stage of budget review? Councillor English?
I may be wrong, but I think that where we are at the moment, it is likely that we will be able to fund it going forward from this committee's own resources, without going to P&R if we choose to do so. Looking at the level of expenditure, where we're going to end up at the year end and going forward, but I could be wrong, but I think we probably could, and it is important enough.
Depends how much park and ride drains our pockets, perhaps.
Well,
but yes.
I would have said to an extent, Mr. Chairman, it actually depends more on the parking review, but in that sense.
Okay, I mean, of our two halves of our medium-term financial report there, you know, one contains all the parking money, the other contains the planning funding, but I'm not even sure if this funding is within ours or is it CHE. It's CHE anyway. So, Councillor Matt Burton, you indicate. Do you want to speak next?
If I may, Chairman, and you've actually just introduced the question I was going to ask quite nicely. So I'm a full member of CHE and only subbing this evening. I'm wondering why, considering firstly this sits under our budget, if I'm understanding that correctly, and secondly we were supposedly partners of equal representation in the air quality working group that this has been born from. Why is this not coming to CHE?
I can tell you that I spoke to the chairman of CHE, discussed it with him, and he was happy for us to move this forwards. So that was in collaboration with the chair of. Yeah. So, and I think one of the things that we've heard mumbled here is let's just get on and do it. We've talked about this so long, so clear resolution to do so. There is relevance of the ongoing budget, though. Back to you, Councillor Burton.
Yeah, if I may, I quite agree. Get on and do it. I don't think the outcome would be any different if it was coming to a different committee. But even if you look at the budgetary pressures that the two committees are under, one showing a significant surplus, okay, so we're wary of possible changes in the future, and one struggling with the increasing costs of temporary accommodation, I think there's an element of one committee spending the money that is allocated to another, and it's almost a little bit nitpicky, but there is a point of procedure, I think, that needs addressing here, and I will take it up with my chairman as well.
I think that's worth doing. The office has got delegated power to authorise these spends up to this value, and what we're doing is supporting the get on and do it. Councillor English?
The issue is more moot for the budget going onwards, given where we are, I don't think we need to delay this decision. But Councillor Burton Jr. is quite right that going forward there may be an issue, but I don't see why, within the resources of one committee or the other, it should be possible to take this forward. But let's not delay this decision, but let's make a note in our that we need to actually clear going forward next year with the next decision with communities, housing and environment.
Can I therefore suggest that this this committee asks that officers note the importance they attach to this and request that every endeavour be made in future budget planning to accommodate further work? A seconder? Councillor English, I think you were there by a fag paper. So, right, we haven't actually concluded the first. So, I'll add that as a part 3. Those in favour to the 3-part motion as set? Unanimous and therefore carried. Thank you. That's very good. Thank you, officers. Item 16. This is the draft local plan that's been submitted to us for consideration. Mrs. Lee, if you would be so kind.
Thank you, and good evening, members. Yes, this report introduces the draft London plan, which has been published for consultation. It's a strategic land use plan for London, so the local plans which London boroughs produce effectively sit beneath the framework provided by this strategic plan. It's got a long time horizon, up to 2041, but certain specific matters, and in particular the housing numbers that the plan contains, only stretch for 10 years, so from 2019 to 2029. And the purpose of this report is to consider what this Council's response to the consultation on the draft London plan should contain. Notwithstanding that it's a strategic plan, it is very lengthy. I think it runs to about 400 pages. So very much our response, our proposed response, is trying to focus down on the issues which have particular implications for this borough. And most notably, that would be in relation to what the plan says around the number of new homes that London is generating a need for, and what the plan says about how those homes will be delivered. So in terms of the first of those, the number of new homes needed, the Greater London Authority, the GLA, rely on their own demographic projections to project future population growth and hence future household growth. It's not new that they use their own projections. The current London plan is based on GLA's own projections, and this new draft London plan anticipates a need for some 66,000 new homes per year for that first 10 years of the plan period. But the fact that the GLA uses its own projections introduces rather a disconnect with the rest of the country, in that the rest of us are using Office of National Statistics projections, or projections based on data from the ONS, whereas London is sort of ploughing its own furrow with its own projections. And in particular, the difference relates, or the difference that has implications for us relates to how what degree of out-migration they're assuming will come out of London. And in essence, they're saying the out-migration will be higher than the ONS say it will be. So as a result of that, they're saying the number of homes they need is lower than the ONS would predict. As members will recall, the government's wanting to introduce a standard methodology for how all local authorities calculate their own housing needs figure. So we might say, if that comes to fruition, really, if London go their own merry way, it doesn't really matter, because we're going to be following a standard methodology, and that will give us our figure. And I think in that scenario, fine, but we don't know as yet what guidance the government is going to issue with that standard methodology. If there's any degree of flexibility in that guidance about whether we should also take account of, as for instance, underestimated needs from elsewhere, that could be an avenue to exploit from anyone who wants to argue that our figures or any other borough's figures should be higher. So I think it's something that we need to treat with caution, and I've suggested that our response makes reference to this fact that basically London's calculations are based on different projections from the rest of the country. Turning to how London proposes, or the London Plan proposes, to meet that need for 66,000 new homes per year. Just to put it in context, that's a rate of delivery that's more or less double what London has achieved in the recent past. So it's a fundamental sort of upswing in terms of the amount of new house building that would need to take place in London. And whilst the response welcomes the fact that the plan says that the objective will be for London to meet its own needs within its own boundaries, I think it's healthy to be a little bit sceptical about whether the individual London boroughs are actually going to be able to do that when we're talking about such a scale of increase. And just as individual London boroughs, and particularly the ones on the sort of the outer skirts, are seeing their housing figures in sort of double or even triple compared to where they've been in the sort of previous iteration of the London Plan. So that's obviously a significant challenge. And the report notes that as a borough ourselves close to London, we might expect that there could be approaches to us down the line from individual London boroughs under a duty to cooperate, asking if we can meet some of their unmet needs. A further point in the response is that to some degree we might feel that London Plan is also sort of tying the hands of the London boroughs about how they do meet this substantial challenge they'll be given, because on one hand they're saying the London Plan is suggesting that there shouldn't be any greenbelt release, which would be an avenue that the outer London boroughs would perhaps consider as a way of helping to meet their housing needs. And also the London Plan is more restrictive around the release of industrial land and offices for residential use, which would be another source that's been used in the past, but is proposed to be more restricted in this new London Plan. A couple of further points in relation to housing. The plan, as drafted, doesn't appear to make full provision for all London's affordable housing needs. The policy proposed 50% affordable housing on sites, whereas the figures suggest that would need to be higher if London were to meet all its affordable housing need. And also, it's a much more expansive definition it gives to gypsies and travellers, which again, of itself, isn't necessarily a problem unless and until London boroughs were to approach authorities such as ourselves with the question of whether we could accommodate their gypsy and traveller needs. Final point to make is that the GLA is interested in working with willing authorities in the wider South East to explore the longer-term potential to accommodate more growth in sustainable locations and in the longer term. So that would be locations outside the capital. And the plan sort of looks, is sort of eyeing up locations that are well connected to London by public transport, or could be made better connected to London by public transport. And there's a diagram in the plan which I've included in the appendix to your report, which sort of identifies infrastructure priorities, 13 of these, which show basically the strategic transport links into London, which could be improved, that could, and thereby service growth in the wider South East that would serve London. The report before you suggests that none of those strategic links appear to serve Maidstone particularly well, and on that basis we're not advocating that our response, if you like, put Maidstone's hand up for additional growth to help accommodate London's needs over and above the challenging figures we know we're going to have coming down the line ourselves. I think I'll leave it there, but obviously very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that very clear explanation. Councillor English, do you want to start?
Thank you very much. Would it be right to say that it is quite surprising that the housing numbers are only there for the first 10 years, and that actually that makes it quite difficult for the London boroughs in the timescale to actually provide the housing. And I think our response notes that, but perhaps it would. I personally feel that perhaps we could be a bit stronger about that point, because I think a lot of the problems of the London plan are actually related to that rather short timescale for the housing numbers. So perhaps we could strengthen our comments about that, perhaps. Going on to the my second point. So in terms of the population trends for London, which are highly speculative, going quite that far forward in time, obviously, quite a lot of current academic thinking around the world, in the Netherlands, for example, is actually challenging the very basis of some of our demographic projections across the whole continent of Europe, but that's for another time. So on paper, if you read paragraph 1.7, it would seem that the lower figure was actually, which results from London's estimates, would actually be preferable. But are we saying that that is because of because of a higher out-migration figure and not because of a lower demographic? Okay, that's fine. That means that probably we are right to challenge that then, because reading it as it stood, it seemed a bit counterintuitive. But thank you for the explanation. I now understand why we're saying that. My question is, this bit about industrial land and office land for being more tightly restricted in the London plan. Maybe I've missed it. Probably have missed it, but I couldn't actually see that point flagged up. The point about the green belt is in the response. And I feel a little uncomfortable about that because, I suppose, on ethical grounds, because Maidstone has very little green belt. It's just got a little bit around Nettlestead. And for us to actually tell London and other authorities with green belt that they should be de-designating it sounds a bit sort of presumptuous, because we haven't really got any apart from around Nettlestead. So I have a little bit of a ethical issue about whether that's the right thing to say. Although I can understand why we're doing it, it might not go down very well with a lot of our neighbouring authorities. If only imagine what Sevenoaks and Tunbridge and Morley and Tunbridge Wells would think of that. Nothing good, I imagine. But I don't see the point about industrial and office land. I may have missed it. Perhaps that would be an alternative to, or at least a partial alternative to, de-designating some of the greenbelt land and less unpalatable to some of our neighbouring authorities.
Is it all right if I come back? No, that's fine. There is just, admittedly, just one sentence on page 42 in relation to, and it is just industrial land, so it's the third paragraph. But, you know, very happy to expand it if just in terms of the green belt point, what the response, I think, says is that rather than the London plan sort of doing a blanket ban on green belt release, what we're suggesting is that it should be down to the London boroughs to work out for themselves whether or not. So it's a bit of a nuance, but it's sort of saying let London boroughs make their own decision rather than, you know, an absolute no.
With those 2 points, expanding on the 2 points I've made about industrial land and with the nuance, I'm sorry, which I hadn't picked up on, and on the first point on which I made about the 10-year time frame causing so many problems, if we can incorporate those, I'm very happy with the response.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to clarify a point made by Councillor English regarding the 10-year forward look in terms of housing. I don't think the intention is for the Mayor to squash up the housing requirements and supply into a 10-year period. What's unusual here is that the look is only for 10 years rather than what we're required to do, which is the 15. So I just wanted to clarify the point. There isn't an attempt to condense 15 years' worth of supply into 10, but what there is an unusual look forward of only 10 years rather than 15.
I'm sorry to come back, but I did actually understand that, and I'm not suggesting it's condensing, but it does make it quite difficult for the local planning authorities in London to actually plan their housing approach within the time period, because by the time they've started a local plan, it's only 8 years. So that's what I'm referring to. That it makes it difficult to plan, not that they're squashing it into 15, into 10.
There is a little bit of one rule for London and one rule for us running throughout this, and perhaps that could be your opening header for the... I'm going to go round because people are indicating, but just picking up your 2 points you've raised there about Greenbelt and about brownfield industrial sites being used. I mean, these are opinions that I think we need to form. Are we actually encourage them to use Greenbelt because it is available, or are we supporting the protection of Greenbelt? There's a nuance that you're constructing into the letter, but I think we actually need a Maidstone position. Well, yeah, but what I'm actually saying, so what does that mean then? We're saying they should use Greenbelt, or no, totally understand, don't use Greenbelt, bring it to Maidstone.
Well, I think what our officers are saying, and I agree with, is don't have a blanket rule that binds every London borough to an identical position, which is what the mayor's...
But one might assume, you know, if politics is the same in the London boroughs as it is here, Greenbelt, that means it's going to go somewhere else. That's good, isn't it? So what's our position? We support that protection of Greenbelt. I will come round and make sure, but or not. So I think we're playing with nuance, but we're not actually responding to that point. And similarly, on the employment land, I mean, there's a principle there. Do we support protection of that space for jobs, for work within London, or will we one day have that peculiar scenario where people will outwards commute to areas like this for work and go back into London at night because there's no employment land? We're not facing that issue. I'm going to go anti-clockwise. Councillor Willis next.
On the point you've just made about Greenbelt, this is not my specialist area, but I am aware that North Kent councils are seriously considering looking at building on Greenbelt, which I find very difficult, because politically it's a difficult thing to discuss. As we haven't got any Greenbelt, and we have a lot of houses being built in small pockets in Maidstone, I would probably strongly support that we need to say to London councils, you need to be looking at your Greenbelt to protect Maidstone, frankly. I'm not going to record that in Gravesend, but I think London Bexley, for example, sorry to pick on them, but Bexley has Greenbelt, I'd imagine. And at the end of the day, we've done our bit, so we need to look at London councils with its big mayor to look at what I think that could be. I don't know what other people think, but our response should, how do we put it, diplomatically echo that.
That's exactly where I was coming from.
I
we
agree
need
with
to
you.
perhaps, as a committee, give a view.
Discuss. Do we need to get other views on that, or can we put that forward as a...
Let's go round and...
One other really quick question. I promise you this is not politically motivated. It's just because I want to understand where we're going. Does this report we've got here, and I know we're hearing in the news that Brexit immigration's not been decided, policy's not been decided yet, but does this report mention Brexit, the effect of Brexit and migration at all? Have you seen it in there?
To be honest, I can't recall in detail if it's in there. Certainly the projections the ONS produce, and I assume it's the same with the GLA, take a balanced kind of holistic view of where they think migration's going to be. They obviously look at past trends, but, you know, will take some forward sight of what's coming down the track. So, you know, without being a demographic expert, I think we're probably best placed to keep our comments, you know, relatively strategic rather than drilling down into the absolute workings of the projections.
I'm just going to bring Mr. Jarman in with some thoughts on the Greenbelt.
Yeah, it's... as Mrs. Lee was saying, there's Greenbelt and Greenbelt. What the Mayor is saying, as Mrs. Lee pointed out, is for the inner Greenbelt, so therefore the outer London boroughs like Bromley, for instance. The Mayor is saying, don't review your Greenbelt boundary, whereas the outer Greenbelt, the bits in Kent, like Sevenoaks, for instance, the government is saying you should review your Greenbelt boundary. You might decide not to change your Greenbelt boundary, but you should review it. So there's an important distinction between the two.
Councillor Wilby.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say with the Greenbelt, I'd be against supporting them actually building on Greenbelt land. These are the lungs of London, and they deal with a lot of pollution. Us encouraging them to build on it is not actually going to help the situation that we're in at the moment. Probably more we should be encouraging them to build in a more sensible manner rather than the shambles of houses we have put up at the moment, rather than building on more land as such. So I wouldn't be supporting any recommendation to advise them or say that we're happy with them building on the green belt.
Okay. There's a view expressed. I'll carry on moving around. Councillor Mumford.
What is that noise? We're tied to the NPPF, and I suggest London is the same. And they're defending their green belt, and we're inventing reasons for it as well, that it's going to combat urban heating, etc., etc. And only one of those, and that is to prevent sprawl, is actually mentioned in the NPPF, and I think that's what we're telling them. And if the policies allow them to look at Greenbelt, they should not invent other reasons not to look at them. That's what I think we're saying. We're not recommending that they eat into their Greenbelt or save it. We're saying apply the NPPF. That's the way I'm reading this.
Councillor Mrs. Prendergast.
Only to reiterate that I would be really very uncomfortable with stating such a strong position as far as the London Green Belt goes. I think our starting line, this council is opposed to, is very, very strong. They've already said, I think Councillor Burton Jr. is looking for something to contradict me here, but if they've already agreed, have you found it? They've already said that London will meet its own needs within its own boundaries. I don't think we should be in a position to tell them what to do. Let them figure it out. Why do we need such a strong position? And I'm a real support, I think that the Green Belt is you spoke about distinction, Mr. Jarman, but the distinction is that London is completely different from Sevenoaks, and, it is this massive urban sprawl, and the Green Belt is possibly more important. I've lived in the London Borough of Bromley, so I've appreciated the importance of the Green Belt there. So I personally would feel very uncomfortable with that, such a strong starting point.
Plenty of room in Headcorn, did you say? No. But if I'm understanding what Mrs. Lee was saying to us right at the beginning correctly, they can consume their own smoke on the basis of we've underestimated the net inward or their net outward migration. If they are going to accommodate their own need, but it's on the basis of we take a load more that we hadn't already calculated. Is that, in essence, what I'm understanding?
Yeah, they're saying that when they measure their need, the assumptions that underpin it mean that they come up with a smaller figure, and so therefore their target is lower than if they...
Because we've underestimated how many people will move out of London and into places such as our lovely borough here, where we've got loads of green bits. It's not called Green Belt, but it's the same difference, just without the name. Yes, that's what we've got to just look at. I mean, I like the way that's worded in the draft response, that we don't support a moratorium on the green belt, if I'm reading it the right way around. Councillor English.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I know I said I had reservations about it, and I do, but fundamentally I think there is another principle involved. The local planning authorities should have the option to determine whether a particular site in Bromley, Bexley or wherever is appropriate. And the moratorium from the Mayor's office, if that was the policy, would not allow the local planning authorities any flexibility whatsoever. And I think that we would not, as a planning authority, like that. It would mean, for example, to apply it here, if we had a development come forward on the Detling Airport site, which is a brownfield site in the middle of the AONB, which is equivalent to the Greenbelt in terms of national importance, that we wouldn't be able to do anything with what is a brownfield site which has already got development on it in part. So it is a very inflexible position. So I don't think if I was a planning officer in Bromley or a member in Bromley, I'd be very happy with that. Secondly, on the industrial land and the reuse of offices, yeah, sure, employment land is very important, but we all know that job markets, office demands change. They change fundamentally. And the fact of the matter is, I can think of quite a few sites, I won't go in, I could be here all night listing them, in London, which are employment sites now, and which are not going to, or in terms of their use, but they're never going to be employment sites, but they're still designated such. And frankly, it's a fool's errand. And it makes for inflexibility, which is why I was saying that the very restrictive approach the Mayor's office is taking is counterproductive, and it will actually, all it will do is further inflate land values in London. It might help meet the target because more people will move out because they can't afford to live in London, which is brilliant. And actually, you can have all the local employment you like, but if you haven't got the workforce, it isn't actually going to work, is it? So I think that the Mayor's office is being very inflexible with its timelines and its policies, and our response with a couple of tweaks is right.
Time to be specific about what those tweaks are.
Well, I thought I was when I started. I just said that I think we do needed to be stronger on our emphasis on just how restrictive in terms of planning and delivery the 10-year time frame is for the local planning authorities, and to actually say that the Mayor's office is being too restrictive on the reuse of employment land. There are appropriate sites which should come forward.
Is that sufficiently clear, Mrs. Lee? You'd know where to take that. And do you want to say something similar about the green belt thing, and then we could just move? Well,
I just think, yes, I do think that. But I agree with what our officers are saying there. The policy is just too blunt. It's like a Birmingham screwdriver.
So, with that steer that Councillor English, I think, has tried to summarise from our debate, can we agree to approve the draft response with further amendment as suggested? Yeah? Is that agreed? Thank you.
Is it possible to still ask? I agree. Is it possible to still ask a question on that agenda item? It doesn't affect the response. It's just a question for information.
Is it vital in public, or could you ask the question of an officer later?
It's about duty to cooperate. I think it might be worth us all. Okay, I'll email and CC you.
Yeah, leave it, Sarah. Let's move on. We've still got plenty to do. And the next item of plenty is agenda item 17, planning services improvements. Mr. Cornell, you start us off, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we looked at this topic back on the 13th of November 2017. What was asked for was two streams of work, really. There were a total of 34 recommendations made by IEC, 27 of them related to operational matters that would sort of be for the officers to take forward or not. And also some questions were asked about some of the terminology used within those recommendations. And so what I've done within Appendix 2 is set out which of the IEC recommendations that are of an operational matter are being taken forward. It's 23 of the 27, and I've sort of cleared up some of the terminology as well. But I think the main thrust of this evening's report relates to the 7 recommendations that were made by IEC in respect to members and committee. What was decided back in November was that a small working party would be formed, comprising of the chair and vice chair of this committee, the planning committee, as well as Councillor Mumford and 3 officers, myself, Rob Jarman and James Bailey. We had the meeting in December and we looked at the IEC recommendations and we collectively tried to come to a sort of consensus in terms of the spirit of what they were suggesting. Now, I can't say, you know, we reached full consensus that day, but I did my best to sort of draft up the ideas, sought feedback again from the members of the working party, and that's what I sort of distilled into this evening's report. So of the 7 recommendations relating to members and committee, 3 aren't favoured to be taken forward, but 4 are, and we sort of nuanced them and developed some ideas of our own, particularly around recommendation 5. But hopefully that will suffice as an introduction, but I'd be pleased to take any further questions.
That's excellent, thank you. I'll note for the record the arrival of Councillor Mrs Hasty. She had indicated earlier via me that she wished to speak on this item, so we'll allow her to catch her breath and perhaps start with Councillor Borton as visiting member to address the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. I will focus my remarks on, as Mr Cornwall ended his comments, the recommendations that relate particularly to the workings of the Planning Committee. And I sought to speak as a member of that committee and the Conservative spokesman on it as well. And I know from speaking to some of our members on the committee and our group leader that we do have some concerns about what is proposed forward. There are some good things in here, particularly the one on training, for example. I think it's much needed. But if I just run through perhaps some of the concerns we have, starting with recommendation number 3 about the parish call-in process, which I think is actually one of the strengths of this council. It gives parish councils the opportunity to have their say, and I think there's a concern in the parish areas that this would have an adverse impact on a already fragile relationship between this council and some parish council. And I think the fact that the head of planning might be able to, in effect, veto some of these call-ins, some of the parishes might not be too happy about. Turning to recommendation 7 next, and also one of the recommendations within number 5, regarding sort of the length of the reports being limited to 10 pages, speaking at the committee being limited to 3 minutes. I personally think this is a bit too restrictive. If you get some items, some very, very big, controversial applications as well, I think you need to have the ability to have as much detail as possible in front of you. And I think condensing woodcut farm into 10 pages would be very difficult, for example, likewise something like Springfield Mill or something, and then limiting some of the contributions by members of the committees to 3 minutes only when they'll have been involved in these applications through, particularly if there's been a pre-app, would be quite tricky as well. So I think that's a problem, and I don't think this committee should proceed with that recommendation. Just finally, Mr Chairman, there are, within recommendation 5, some other points. Firstly, I think anyone who sits on the planning committee will know it's quite intense at times, and you get quite a lot of lobbying, and you have to have the ability to be able to make some big decisions from time to time that might not be the most popular thing, because you are a quasi-judicial committee. And therefore I'm concerned that reducing the number of members from 13 to 11 will place an additional burden on those members of the committee. I do think that's a worry. And actually, if you look at some of our neighbouring authorities like Swale, Tunbridge and Moreland, I think now you have even bigger planning committees than we do in terms of the numbers who are sitting on them. So I think we should probably just leave it at 13, to be honest. And finally, the one that concerns me the most is the idea, and it is recommendation F, to hold the committee in the afternoon rather than the evening, because I think this will totally exclude anyone involved in a planning application, whether that be an objector, whether that be a member of a planning parish council, whether that be an applicant who works during the day. I think the time of the meeting starting at 6 is fine as it is. It would exclude members as well from speaking as visiting members or sitting on the committee if they hold a full-time job. And just like this committee's in the evening and every other council committee's in the evening, I think that the planning committee should remain in the evening as well. I understand where that's come from, because often it does run late, but I think there's actually a very simple solution to the problem, which is actually that the planning committee is scheduled to happen every fortnight rather than every 3 weeks. And yes, you might have a greater number of meetings, but those meetings would probably be shorter because you'd have fewer adjourned meetings and you'd actually have more agendas to publish. But they'd be shorter, you'd get better decision-making because we wouldn't be staying so long. And actually, I think it's fair to say that those of us who sit on the planning committee are used to giving up our Thursday nights anyway, and a Thursday night without a planning committee is a bit of a rarity these days. And by having it every fortnight, I think that you'd you would normalise that process. We wouldn't stay too late into the evening, and it would be much better and much simpler. So I appreciate there is some good in this report, but I do think those are quite important and fundamental changes to the process. And if you change the process, members, then ultimately you change the outcome as well. So I do hope you'll take those views on board when making your decision tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hastie, would you still like to speak on this item?
Thank you. I can just about breathe now. I'm sprinting from the car park. I'm not going to say too much more other than what Councillor Borton said. I support what he said. Really, just my concern was the moving of the committee to the afternoon. It would rule out a lot of people from being able to serve on the committee and from the public representation and for the parish councils and anyone else that may want to come along. And planning is one of those things that does affect everyone in the community. And I think it would be a really terrible thing. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Very concisely put. Thank you. I'm going to start this time from my left. That means, Councillor Mrs Springett, you get to go first, and then we shall... Councillor Mumford, you would like to go first? No.
Firstly, a question to put this in context and then a suggestion. The question is to Mr Jarman, is there a backlog of applications because of the committee's inability to listen to them and decide on them?
If you mean is there a backlog of applications which have been with us for over 8 weeks or 13 weeks, then the answer is always yes.
Yeah, really, I want to know whether we're holding the system up or whether that they're not ready.
In pure volume terms, it's a relatively small number because a relatively small number of applications go to planning committee.
We've heard already from Councillor Borton. Do you want to deal with each one of these suggestions
that is my intention, is to take items 1 to 7 individually.
And I think that would be
it's probably worth... Well, what I'd say is let's do one round in the general, and then we'll come to each individual proposal I'll ask for somebody to move it, and then people can make a counter to it if
Okay,
necessary.
so if you're going to do it that way, I want to refer to part 2 of the recommendation, and I want to refer you to page 57, 58, when I found them. Let me get to them. If you're looking at it in portrait, at the top of page 57, the comment there, not unacceptable through of a paperless planning for parishes, says that it's not acceptable for parishes. But then it goes on to say recommendation is applicable to all users.
Would you mind if I just interrupt for a second, just for some clarity? I thought you were speaking specifically about the second recommendation.
No.
Appendix. Okay, so I just want to clarify this so we all know what we're...
Well, to clarify, you said to me we'll go through the first 7, and what I assumed that you was going to leave Appendix 2 out, and I went straight on to Appendix 2 to allow you to go 1 to 7 afterwards.
I understand what you're saying, but to be clear, I thought we were talking in particular about recommendation 2, which is made up of 7 pieces, and I suggest we deal with that. Then I'll come back to recommendation 1 if there's some debate around that. But most of the comments so far have related to recommendation 2. Yes, in the 7 parts. So are there any other particular comments you want to make of the 7 parts of recommendation 2? If I've thrown you, I'll carry on round and come back to you if...
What I was suggesting that we take Appendix 1, we deal with number 1, number 2, number 3, and then carry on like that.
Yes, but I was actually thinking we were going to do a recommendation 2, 1 to 7 in that style, because that's where the majority of the comments had been thus far. And then we'll come back to recommendation 1 in that style if that suits everybody in the committee. Yes? Councillor Wilby.
Okay, again, I'd like to support the fact of moving it to an evening time would actually rule me out coming to any planning meetings when I sub for it. So I'm against that. Yeah, so afternoon, sorry. Move it to afternoon would actually scuff on me. Also, in item on 3, I believe at the last meeting, Councillor Clark, who subbed for me, did raise about neighbourhood groups who have neighbourhood plans actually having the forums, having the ability to call in plans. I've seen nothing of that actually in this report. I've got some more.
But they're the comments relating to the 7 parts of recommendation 2 for now. Okay. Councillor English, or you got more to say on that? Back to you then, Councillor Wilby.
This has been asked by another councillor. He's asked me to say, could the reports be streamlined and a little bit easier to actually read for the planning committee? He said that sometimes there's too much depth in there, not enough with the photos, for example, that actually come to the committee at the meeting. There could be some more.
You don't see them in paper format.
Yeah, you don't see them in paper format. Basically, you don't get to see the pictures.
Is that not contained within one of the 7 recommendations? Do you mean something different to what is within the 7?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. I'll find it. I'll come back and find it. So.
I'll come back to you if you want to gather your thoughts. Councillor English.
I think we need to ask ourselves what we're trying to achieve fundamentally when we look at the function in the planning committee. There is a danger, like when we had some of the peers from other councils come to talk to us, one of the criticisms made by our members and some of our officers across the board was, well, they only seem to be interested in how quickly you can get out the door. Now, that is important. Speed of decision-making is important, but what is also important is the quality of the decisions that are made and the outcomes. what is not advisable is to end up saying, oh, we did that meeting in 2 hours, aren't we good? And to have some terrible decisions that haven't been discussed, have the public go home even more upset than they are already because they think councillors, well, they already think we don't listen to them enough, but there's a danger of, with the emphasis in this report where we're going, of actually making that far, far worse. Now, to take some of the detailed proposals, if we reduce the size of the planning committee, well, yeah, it may have a very small effect in reducing the time. What it will do is it will ensure that Mr Mumford probably won't be a member of that committee, and UKIP, if there still is a UKIP group, because, or the Labour group won't be a member of that committee because there isn't sufficient places on the committee. So what we're doing is making the planning committee more unrepresentative. We're also making it more unrepresentative in other ways, because members who contribute significantly to that committee at the moment, who happen to work for Kent County Council, for example, or have other forms of employment, simply won't be able to attend on a regular basis. So we'll be losing input. That's apart from the fact that many members of the public who want to come along and contribute won't be able to do so. So, yeah, that may well all add up to a quicker decision-making process. Not entirely sure it helps in terms of democracy and accountability or even representation of the members of this committee. Some of the other proposals I don't have a problem with. Councillor Bolton has, well, in principle anyway, but in how it works is another matter. It was always been the case that members of this council and parish councils were supposed to use planning grounds or material considerations to call in applications. That's not actually a change. My question really is about who would decide, because I can see a lot of friction being created if, with the best will in the world, the planning department said to a parish councillor or a councillor, you can't call that in because it's not a material consideration. So I think if we were to proceed with that recommendation, we need to give some thought as to how it would actually operate in practice, because I can see some some very awkward discussions ensuing down the course. Going back, the changes to the speakers list and other things are really merely going back to where we should have been to a large extent, because what has happened over the last few years is it's grown and grown and grown, and we've had members from the other side of town turning up on occasion to speak to planning applications, which has no relation whatsoever to do with their wards. And we've had multiple parish councils, sometimes for the best of reasons, but really it doesn't add anything, because how many times can you repeat the same objections in one meeting? And it does make it rather unfair, because you have 6 objectors and 1 applicant, or you know, it does sort of tilt the rules of natural justice in many ways. So I do think that some of these recommendations are fine, but they probably need some tweaking, because the situation, looking at the list of speakers, for example, the situation is not the same in parished and non-parished areas, so we probably need to look at some of the nuances around that and how it actually works. In terms of some of the other suggestions, we talked about streamlining reports, that's fine, but you can be too streamlined, because the danger of streamlining reports too much is that you then need an officer to spend 15 minutes introducing the item, because there's not enough information in the report and you get lots of questions. So there's a balance to be met there. And an arbitrary target of 10 pages, well, not going to work. It has to be down to what actually is needed in the report, and not whether it's 9.5 pages or 11.5. Similarly, in terms of speaking, yes, we need to reduce that, and we have been working on reducing member speeches. I actually stopped a couple of members speaking at the last meeting, and we do need to be more restrictive about this. But saying you can only speak once can be quite difficult, especially if you're trying to debate grounds for refusal or approval of an application, because it does go the other way. And we need to actually not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we're in danger of doing with some of these recommendations. Sorry, I've probably broken my own recommendations, spoken for far too long, but there is a lot we need to change with this.
Thank goodness you weren't writing the report. Councillor Cox. Before we come to you, Councillor Cox, you are next, but I'd like to just throw back some thoughts on some of those things that you've just said while they're fresh. The number on the committee, so I think you were presenting an argument that said you're more likely to have political balance at 13. Well, if we really believe that, then we should probably do something at 15, which I think was the political balance number that we have on P&R, if that's really what we're trying to achieve. So there's an argument you're making for increasing the size of the committee. Personally, I'd go the other way. Quality of decisions, I think, is everything. I do not believe we make good decisions at 10:30 at night. I don't believe we make good decisions at 10 o'clock at night. After a full day's work and trying to read the papers, I just think it's a ridiculous time of night to be making such major decisions. The comment about members speaking as visiting members that are not directly connected to the ward, that does stop political representation on behalf of members of the public, where a ward might all be one particular shade of political spectrum and no representation from an opponent view. And presumably we wouldn't have an objection to political group spokespersons speaking, which kind of undermines a visiting member speaking if they're not a ward member. And finally, I think a lot of it is about chairmanship, isn't it? If you want to keep it tight and run it tight, and the chairman lives and dies by his record and his reputation because he is elected by that committee. Anyway, enough from a chairman who's waffling on. Councillor Cox, it really is your turn.
How concise. Yeah, I really do think, I'm just going to go down in the order they present themselves. The parish musings that we've looked at here, I think it is very important, and many of the parishes do represent themselves at meetings. They do give good reasons for the calling, but I think that needs to be kept in check. The report length and also the amount of pages that are on there is relevant to the size of the application and the importance of the application. I don't think we should stipulate. The size of the committee being 13, I think it's fair. I don't think just by reducing it you're necessarily going to get anything done any quicker. I mean, if you just said you could only speak once and you multiply who's speaking, yes, you would. But sometimes, as Councillor English has said, that's not possible. I think it's important to look at when different items are on the agenda. We could put items where representation is given by architects or developers. That could possibly be further earlier, so that people attending from the public knew that their items would be later on, and they wouldn't have to take time off work to get here at 6 o'clock. Those sorts of things I think are possible to look at. But we must look at them in a practical way. So not just we've got to abide by the laws that are the rules that are set down if we go with them. And lastly, I think to make the reports more readable, I think we need to look into the technology that we have. I've said this before, we have a screen that is put up behind us for the last 6 or 7 months, and it's pointless because nothing's ever on it. The information that the officers give is on these screens, and it is too small. We need to see blow-ups of the images. We can do that on our own tablets, but I think it's got to be practical for us to do it. And I think sometimes when we've had actual materials in the meeting, and we've actually seen the items and actually seen a model, it's a much easier way of doing things. So I think we need to evaluate that. So possibly the links to photographs and reports, so that when you're on site, you can, with one button press, go to the reports rather than go back to the portal, have to copy the information, etc. I think those sorts of things would make, I know it sounds like I'm just thinking about the committee, but we're the ones that sit here. If we have a workload that is slowing things down, then I think, look at this Thursday. We've only got one item to come in for. And I think that is a waste of officers' time. They have to wait till 6 o'clock and then come in. We should look at that and say, well, is anything else ready to come to that report? we'd still have a week. Is there stuff we could slot in? Is that sort of thing possible to move through the items that are as a backlog? I think what Councillor Mumford was saying was, is it solely down to the committee that we are being held, that the planning department is being held up? Or is it the sheer weight of planning applications that are coming to planning department? Because it may be that we have this tidal wave at the moment and it'll slowly ebb away as we move forward. I don't think this is completely wrong what's in here, but I do think moving the time of the actual start time could be critical. It would preclude people in full-time employment as councillors being able to sit so regularly on our committee. Thank you.
It's an interesting thought to contemplate. There's the delay that coming to planning committee may cause of determining an application contributing to the backlog, but if we're slightly reassured that that's not a very significant factor in the big pot of numbers. But I wonder how much officer time is actually spent sat here on a Thursday and in the chairman's briefing and in the preparation for the public display. And there's officers that are here for one application and not another. I wonder how many delegated authority decisions could be being determined while all of that's going on. That might be where the casualty to swift decision-making occurs. Mr Jarman, a very brief response and then I'll carry on.
Just to chime with that, and I think Councillor Cox alluded to this himself, I do question the value for public money of having one item this Thursday at Planning Committee. Whereas, as the Chairman said, and as you know, Councillor Cox, as all members know, it's an entourage of officers. It's a cost of putting these lights on, heat in this building.
So there have been a number of occasions where I've pulled meetings of this committee where there's been insufficient business, and similarly with the JTB. Presumably the Chairman of Planning would have that same ability to pull a meeting? Because the other chairmen do. I'm asking the question rather than...
No, we don't. The application really does have to be determined in a certain window of time, and unless there is a specific reason to defer it. And whilst it's not ideal to have this one planning application on the next agenda, the alternative was trying to determine it in a very limited time span, which would have been totally unfair. But I would point out it's not one item on the agenda. There is a very important Section 106 report on that agenda as well. So it's not just that. So, but obviously we would have liked to have got through that. But you can't, as you've alluded to, Mr Chairman, try and squeeze debating an important planning application in a few minutes and risking having to come back halfway through it. You know,
I don't think I was saying that. What I was saying is the Chairman's discretion could be...
The Chairman does not have the discretion in planning to do that.
If the timescales allow, or if there is agreement with the applicant, I'm just asking whether there is an ability to use discretion. Anyway...
It doesn't exist in planning or in licensing.
Right, let's move on to Councillor Mrs Prendergast.
I'll try not to be repetitive and speak in bullet points. Just point two, I just wondered if we should just discuss the potential of introducing some e-learning modules in there that we can do online in our own time and try and save time, you know, that would save officer time, our time, putting lights on. I don't have much to add to what Councillor Borton and Councillor English have already said about parish councils, other than there have been occasions when we have more than one parish council that's impacted or where it crosses parish boundaries, and I think it would be wrong in that case to restrict them. And I've also seen committees where parish councils have come in and they've, you know, 3 parish councils will speak about different subjects. One will talk about landscape impacts and one will talk about heritage impacts, and I think it's quite important that we give them the opportunity to discuss what affects them most. Speaking arrangements, I find the notion of just one member speaking for a ward absolutely unworkable. What if we have members who are from different political parties, as we have in Fand? What if we have a situation, as we did the other night, where 3 ward members couldn't agree with each other? You know, I think we're elected members. We have a right to come and speak, and I think it's an absolute no-goer. Regarding officer opening statements, I'm not sort of overly keen to restrict if there are complex applications there. But just another suggestion. At Kent, all agendas come with a caveat that starts with the chairman assumes that all members have read the agenda. The presentations are extremely short. There are opportunities to ask direct questions, and I think that's something perhaps we should put forward to democracy too, because I think that would save a lot of time and ensure members have read their agendas. Again, committee debates, no, I'm not very happy about restricting it to 3 minutes or whatever the suggestion is. And again, I think it's down to the chairman. You know, yes, we do have some members who talk at length about historical context for 8 minutes and others who spend 13 minutes discussing the positioning of one bollard. I think that's down to the chairman to restrict that, but I'm not happy for members to be restricted, especially when there are complex applications that need debate and questions answered. Late representations, yes, I think that's fine. That goes with the chairman's discretion. I don't really have a strong view on the size of the committee. I'd be interested to see what other members say. Personally, I'm really happy with afternoon meetings because I don't get an evening to myself in the week. And I do agree that making decisions at 10:30 at night is really, really difficult. But then I also accept that it will always impact on someone. People who are working will find it difficult. People who have young families will find it equally difficult in the evening. So that's... And streamlining committee reports, yes, it's the same as members rambling on for 8 minutes. You know, I've read reports that say this is a long-established farming family who've been in Maidstone for 100 years and the soft fruit business is worth 57 million, and we don't need that. They're not planning considerations, and we often get them. So that's a thought, you know, perhaps if we could look at streamlining them in that way and then make sure that all the relevant information is there, because sometimes I've struggled to find relevant planning information within the report, and I've had to refer back to the planning portal. So those are just things that we might want to talk about or consider.
Material information only. Councillor Matt Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, so I'll take this in order to make it sort of logical. 1 and 2, yeah, brilliant. Obviously, point 2 means that point 1 is not needed, so yeah, happy with that. Point 3, now, I was very much thinking in the same way as Councillor English on this, that it's not the issue of of restricting anybody, let alone parish councils, from bringing non-material issues to the committee. It's where that decision is made. Now, if we can come up with a sensible democratic solution to that this evening, then I'd support it. If not, I think you're going to be very, very hard-pressed to convince people sat around this table that that's a right we ought to be taking away from parish councils. That said, and I will caveat this with, I represent a ward that is half parished and half not, and I think if you were designing the system again from scratch, you would have all call-ins come through the ward member, because what we've actually created is a scenario where one group of residents can afford to pay a precept and therefore has greater access to the planning system. So I do think that there's an issue there, but unfortunately it's the system we have, and we would be shooting ourselves in the foot quite significantly if we opted to take it away now. If we were sorting this out from a blank sheet of paper, I don't think we'd have it in there. That's my personal view on that. Number 5, so speaking like number of speakers, I would be really uncomfortable with it all, again, except for there is that one little caveat that mentions residents' associations under this. I wonder if there's something we can do, actually, to bring a residents' association's rights up to the same sort of level in this planning system. Where you have an active residents association that might point people who don't know the planning system very well in the right direction to get their voice heard, what is the difference functionally between that and a parish council? I'm just thinking about the representation for areas that don't have parishes. Presentation's no longer than 5 minutes. Great. I'd echo Councillor Mrs Prendergast's sentiments that I think, you know, there should be this enforcement, even if it is just a tagline on every set of reports that we get for every committee, that says, you know, it's assumed that we've all read it. Therefore, any presentations we get should be short and snappy. If anything, perhaps they're more for the benefit of people in the gallery who aren't necessarily knowledgeable about the planning portal and so on. So they should just be a synopsis and that's it. Great. There was a thing, I think, in 5C about anybody intending to speak having to give notice 48 hours beforehand. And I'd just like some clarification on whether that extends to members of the council not on planning committee, because if so, we're creating a new norm there that doesn't apply to any of our other committees. You know, we've got to look for examples of things that work well, and I think actually, you know, we're all elected to this council and we all should enjoy access to putting our views forward at any committee on behalf of our residents. That's the way it should work. So that I'm not comfortable with. I actually think so going on to point E, I actually think cutting down to 11 members probably doesn't go far enough, but I'd be happy to settle with cutting down to 11 members to begin with. I don't really buy the argument that it would create more work for individual members of the planning committee if there were fewer of us. There was that argument made earlier, because we all go away and do our own research anyway, surely, if we're conscientious members of the planning committee, and, you know, whether there's 11 of us or 13 of us doing that, we're all doing it anyway. So, you know, 9 members would be great. It works for all the service committees, but I'll take 11 at this point. Afternoon meetings. Now, instinctually, I've always been really against this. I'm in a very, this is in relation to the who works during the day and who this might restrict from attending meetings. I personally am in a very privileged position that my boss happens to understand the work that I do here and is happy for me to take the time to attend meetings during the day. Even in that scenario...
I never said happy, I understand.
Well, this is exactly what I'm getting to. Even in that scenario, I feel the pressures of balancing what I do here in the chamber, in my ward, and my day job. So instinctually, I'd always be really against it. The reality is, if you take a step back from personal positions, you're always going to upset somebody, whether you have meetings in the evenings or in the daytime. You know, somebody with a young family might actually prefer the daytime meetings, for example. So to me, the overriding argument on this is what is best for, firstly, the decision-making process, and actually what is the most efficient and effective use of the time of the people that we need there to support us in making those important decisions. So what is the most effective use of officer time? And so actually I could be swayed, on balance, stepping back to go for afternoon meetings. I'd like to ask a question. Perhaps this goes to the chairman, but to anybody who is involved in the working group. Why is option 6 not being considered at this committee this evening? I think it says in the final column, the working group was not minded to consider this recommendation. Why? Well, I'd like to know a little bit more about that, because...
I think it is being considered, it's just that there was no steer from the working group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because to my mind, okay, so I don't necessarily think under the column MBC interpretation and commentary... Go on, I'd like the answer.
Councillor English.
It would be effectively saying that the planning committee could not take a view that material planning considerations were more important than a particular policy, And planning law nationally says that material considerations can override a policy. And secondly, what the hell do you do when a policy says you do approve it and another policy says you don't approve it? So this would actually be absolute nonsense in practice if we actually tried to adopt it.
Okay, if that is the representation of what's written here that we're going with, then I perhaps misunderstood it. I took it to mean that we would write something into. So I'm taking the first column version of this rather than the interpretation that sits next to it. So we are saying that where outline permission is put forward for a site that is, for example, in the local plan, then it would require us to have material planning considerations, such as access considerations, to override it.
Councillor English, it is useful if you're private, could you use your microphones?
Actually, that's specifically what it says you can't do. It says implement constitutional change to ensure that planning committee can only refuse outline planning permission on an allocated site where it's not compliant with policy. To give you a controversial example, to take that economic development proposal we turned down at Woodside, we would have had to approve it. We would have no option.
Okay, yeah, no, I take that. I maybe have misinterpreted it then, in that case. And then, finally, 10-page reports. I think, from what I'm hearing so far around the room, we're actually kind of all in agreement to this. We're already going down a corridor of more concise reports, but we don't want to be prescriptive. So I think that's actually, from what I'm hearing, agreed, and I agree as well.
Councillor Mrs Springett.
Thank you. My first comment is I think we've had some incredibly long planning committees and some incredibly long agendas, but I do tend to feel that that is a result of us having no 5-year land supply, no local plan, which brought an absolute rush of applications in. So there's a little bit of me that says I actually think this is going to sort itself out over time now. I'm hoping it will sort itself out over time now that we do have more clarity. So that's one thing. I don't accept cutting parish councils calling out. I'm afraid. I do think they should be allowed to speak, and I don't think they should have to give a material planning reason. They should just say, we're not happy, we object. All right? I know you won't agree with me, but they have the right to represent the people. They don't all have the planning knowledge. They have the right to say, we're not happy. I do agree with limiting the time of officer presentations. The information should be in the papers. The details should be in the papers, which members have the time to read in their own time, when they don't have much time, but they can read it. And I think to have a very, very long presentation at the beginning, I don't think is necessary. It might help the public, but I think it should be more of an overview, and I think a lot of time could be saved there. The only other thing I really would like to I'm not happy with, in number 7, I don't agree with streamlining the reports to a maximum of 10 pages. That is too restrictive, especially where you get a very big application. But the bit that really, really concerns me is the bit that says reports should detail fees attracted, i.e. pre-app, PPA, planning fees and projected new home bonuses and council tax business rate receipts to provide a full picture of the financial implications of the development. To me, that is totally, totally wrong. The application should be determined on its planning merits according to policy, and it shouldn't be who has the amount of money to go for a PPA or who's paying the biggest fee. And I totally, totally object to the thought of any financial details being put in a planning application that could make members think, a lot of money coming in on this one, chaps. That totally goes against what I thought planning was about. I think applications should purely be decided on merit, policy and planning considerations.
Mr. Jarman.
Well, whatever your perspective is, obviously you're against it, Councillor Springett, but the government, I think it was 2 years ago, said that that kind of thing is a material planning consideration. How much one attaches to is a different story.
Councillor, you finished, Councillor Mrs. Sprigg. Councillor Mumford, I think you did want to come back on something earlier, but after this, we're just going to deal with this set of 7. Do you want to say something?
Yes, I completely confused what you was going to do. I didn't know that you was going to go through each member, each point. I thought you was going to go through each point with each member and decide. And that avoids throwing bath water out with the baby. Seems that we've got general agreement that the training aspect we all agree on. As far as number 3, not being, I believe that's not workable. I agree with Councillor English that we're heading for trouble of who decides, so that's got to be really spoken about. Speaking arrangements, limiting speakers. At one time they was talking about limiting to 2 minutes, and anyone that's tried to put a 3-minute together knows the problems that you get with a 2-minute. As far as the committee members, that's down to the chairman, so I'm not in favour of A under speaking arrangements. Under the maximum of 4 speakers being allowed, yeah, I think where it's right in parish council or residents association, if you've got a residents association, normally you haven't got a parish council, unless you are looking at residents associations that have been set up within a parish. And if that's what that's talking about, I would suggest the asterisk should be, if the residents association wish to speak, this should be the expense of an objector. So if you've got a residents' association and a parish council, remove the objector. Opening presentation, no one wants to see it restricted into a tight jacket. Yeah, keep it to, so that recommendation shouldn't really be in there, and we don't have a consensus on that. But we do have a consensus on late representation. I think we all agree with the 2 late representations. I believe that, along with the other members, that E, the reduction in size of the planning committee, will be undemocratic, and therefore I wouldn't like to see that. But on F, when we are talking about afternoons rather than evenings.
Can I ask that we keep this to 1 meeting?
My commitment to planning is this. On the Wednesday, I go and visit, I speed read the papers, I go over them, and then I go out and visit any site I'm not familiar with. And on Thursday, I go through the papers and the portal in detail. And that evening, I go to the meeting. That's 2 days it takes out of my week. If you now put it as an afternoon meeting, I'll have to do my site visits on another day. So Tuesday I will start my site visits. Wednesday I will be reading the papers. And it will now go over 3 days for me. That's the way I do it. And so I would hate to see it go the afternoon. So because instead of taking 2 days of my life, it will take 3 days of my life. And all the other points about being democratic and allowing people to come to the meeting, I agree with. So I'd hate to see it go to an afternoon meetings. And I believe 6 is, as Councillor English said, not workable.
I can't help but observe if you did your reading the evening before, it's the same net difference. But let's move on with this point by point. Now, I hope officers aren't going to give me a hard time about having a proposal and on each individual item. I'm going to take these in order. So, point 1 first. Councillor. You need to use the microphone, Councillor Willis.
Yeah, can I just make some general points? Because I hadn't spoken. I put up to speak after Clive had spoken. Yeah, Councillor English. So.
Okay, please try not to be repetitious, but yes.
Yeah, no, really. Can I ask officers, a very valid comment that Councillor Springett made, well, I think very valid. Since I've been on the council, we seem to have a tortuous time without a 5-year land supply that we now have, or very close to have. Is the planning department, would you project, and I'll ask any of the two officers, would you now project that our workload in terms of applications between, say, 2015, where it seemed to start growing very quickly, and now, is there a difference? What Councillor Springett said, do you agree with that comment that lots of pre-local plan applications, and now it's, do you think it's still going to be as busy, or?
Yeah, it's, there is a downward trend, but obviously it's not a binary picture. What we've been trying to calculate is quite often developers will put in an outline application, get consent, then sit on the land for a period of time before they put in reserved matters. And that's the big unknown for us, is the time taken between getting outline approval and submitting the reserved matters. I definitely think that in the next financial year, we'll see less majors overall, but we'll see probably an increase in reserved matters.
The one thing I strongly disagree with, and this is Councillor Porton and other people have spoken the same way, the plan, if we're not here as a council to have a good planning committee that is dedicated, like Councillor Mumford demonstrated in what he does, if we're not here to do that, then what is our job? And whatever this costs to get it right, planning decisions last a long time, as we all know, because we always go, how do you get planning, etc., etc. We need to have a planning committee that can, the public can democratically integrate with, work with. So these rules here where we're allowing people to consult and speak on the night, and two, that people on the committee are able to do as much work as, and be available, especially you've got a mix of people, retired people, younger people that are working, so we get the best people on planning, like we do, hopefully. And also, so therefore, I understand it's officers' time out of work time, so therefore it's costing money. But I think if we're not here to do that, then why are we here? We're here to make the best planning decisions, most informed planning decisions at meetings we can. So I strongly disagree with moving the committees to the afternoon for those reasons. And I don't necessarily understand about reducing the size of the planning committee, because I think it's important to have people with different views on the planning committee. Not political views, but different understanding of planning. And quite often on this council, that's quite often recently been people from other parties. They offer a bit of independence, where they offer a different view to the two mainstream parties in Maidstone. So I don't agree with 13 to 11, and if we very strongly, I could not vote for anything that said planning committee was in the afternoon.
Okay, I still think we've got some justification to do to actually say that we make good decisions at 10:30. But enough said, let's go through these. We're going to go 1 to 7. I think the options are yes, no, or amend. Okay, so if I said, I'll take a show of hands on each one. So we'll do this on number 1 and say, is that a no? Right, that's cleared up number 1. Number 2, reviewing member reduction, is that a yes?
I think the modern learning is actually the reference to the E-modules that Councillor Prendergast.
Right, so it's an amend. We'd like to... Right, so this is a yes with a request to investigate e-learning modules? Yes? And just put your hands up so we all got, because otherwise legal will keep poking me in the ribs. Right, thank you. Number 3, review the parish call-in. Is that a yes? Right. Councillor English is suggesting it needs a bit more thinking about. Is it a clear no?
At this stage, I think we
Right.
should say no.
Please put your hand up if you think that's a clear no. That, again, is unanimously decided on that basis. Right. Councillor Wilby.
Could I ask the possibility, I know we have neighbourhood forums with neighbourhood plans. The whole point of having neighbourhood plans is so they can object to planning, comments on planning.
All right, so
can we have that?
We want to put a comment alongside that. I would just say that where residents' associations are mentioned, I've encountered this before, that there is an issue because they're not all constitutionally necessarily similar, compliant, elected, have no mandate. You can call yourself an association and you'd qualify. So perhaps that we would ask that neighbourhood forums, consideration be given to recognising neighbourhood forums in the same way as parishes. Yes. Right, Councillor Wilby, I'll take you. You've raised this, and I'll come to you, Councillor English.
Okay. I've only proposed it for ones that actually have a neighbourhood plan, because that way, obviously, their plan has been voted on by the people of that area.
Well, they are actually a forum which is recognised with a legal definition, yes? So that's why we're saying forum. It's not that they are a residents' association. They happen to be, but that's not where the recognition would come through. Councillor English?
We used to have a rule, and I don't see why we aren't sticking to this, that residents' associations, not fora, which is the proper plural of forums, it's not forums, it's fora, but never mind. We used to say that you had to prove that you were a constituted association, and I think that at least we should actually be saying, because there was some suggestion that a couple of recent applications, there were what you might call astroturf associations being brought in, American political term, and they weren't actually genuine. So we need to be sure that they do actually represent someone.
Well, that's why we are only talking about neighbourhood forum, and I might choose to disagree with you concerning the plural. Having researched that extensively, being involved with a network of business forums, that was quite an interesting thing.
I'm sure you're wrong.
But okay.
But we're talking about two different things.
We are talking about two different things, so I want to put some clarity.
Councillor Wilby is referring to the right to call in, not to comment, which I'm quite happy for a designated neighbourhood forum to actually be able to do that. We shouldn't confuse that with residents' associations properly constituted being able to comment, which is two different.
There is no definition of properly constituted, and I believe that that would occupy one of the public slots currently. Yes, and that would be their mechanism to comment, or to put written representation, and then the committee decide what weight to give that grouping or otherwise. Mr. Jarman.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I do think we need to.
I've asked for Mr. Jarman. Councillor English, I'll take Mr. Jarman. I'll come back to you if need be.
Sorry, it's nothing to do with residents' groups or neighbourhood forums. It was just a point of clarification. For me, it's an important one. Are we saying that, are you saying that parish councils and possibly residents' groups don't have to give material planning reasons? Because that's actually
I believe that the way the committee were saying no to this was that we wanted to maintain the right of a parish council to call in an application. The validity of the call-in reasons would become part of the material consideration of the committee's deliberations, and we're not setting a bar for what is a good material reason or not, of whether we accept their call-in or not. Is that's, I believe, the decision the committee have made to this point. Then we've clouded it by saying, but a neighbourhood forum should have the same ability, where they are recognised under the Localism Act, which seems to perhaps be giving them some enhanced powers as we move on anyway. And then the issue of residents' associations came into it, and I think we're at the stage of not giving them anything additional because it's undefined exactly what a residents' association may or may not be. Does that summarise the position?
It does. No one was suggesting they'd be able to do anything other than comment, but there is an issue about what a residents' association is, and I think we need to investigate that further because it's being abused.
Perhaps something to pick up with the statement of community involvement in the work programme later. Right, I'm going to... Is it relevant to this point?
Yes, it is. It's to say that we have voted on number 3 and we're saying we're not accepting that recommendation that came to us. I think the issue of whether a neighbourhood group should be given a call-in right where they haven't got a parish needs to be taken away from this decision because I don't think we need to discuss it now. We need to say, can we put that on our work programme to discuss as a future item as to whether there should be recognition of neighbourhood
I think
groups.
that's what we're going to do.
I don't think we can change this. We've either got to accept these or not.
That's dealt with, but there's another request of this committee that officers look at how a properly constructed neighbourhood forum could also have the ability to call in. We're asking officers to look at that. Is that agreed? Right. We're moving on to 4. Councillor Matt Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to try and, if it so pleases the committee, try and encapture what I was saying about the imbalance of access between parish and non-parished areas. Not in terms of the call-in, because I recognise that they have to be constituted in a certain way as bodies to have that power. I understand that. But in terms of the number of allotted speakers, so we have just voted for... oh, no, sorry, we haven't got to it yet. My mistake, Chairman, I'm confusing my numbers.
We'll come back to that on that item then. So, if I may move to 4, the review of officer attendance at committee to ensure appropriate legal time. We're saying no to further review. Hands up if that's a no. It's not unanimous, so that might be an amend. Or are there some people that would like to say yes? Councillor Cox.
I think this, again, dependent if an item might have been nominated officer time, say through a PPA, that we shouldn't restrict it because then the officer would say, well, I've got all these experts coming and they're counted as officers and therefore we said, no, we can't have those because we've just said we don't want to have...
So we're saying no to reviewing this further.
We already do this anyway, because quite often we say to the highway officer or the landscape officer or a heritage officer, you're not required at this committee meeting. So it's already being done.
So it's no to further review, and we're actually implying that we maintain the status quo. Yes. So just to be clear, can I, if that's what you're wishing, hands up for that no plus status quo. That's unanimous and clear. Right. Now we're on number 5. And it's 5A. So planning committee operation, the principle of limiting the number of speakers. I'm just trying to see how we can draw this out as... So it's just a no. I'll start it off with a no. Does it have consensus as a no? As written, a no. Just to be clear, are there some that might want to say an amend? Right. Councillor Burton, what do you want to suggest?
Chairman, I'm bringing a particular interest to this, if you like. So my amendment is very specific. It is just to say that where it says if the parish wish to speak, they take the speaking slot at the expense of the Residents' Association. I'd like that amended to stipulate that actually in non-parished areas that additional slot goes to any other concerned resident. Because then we avoid the scenario where we've got to try and identify exactly which body constitutes a residents' association. We're just saying that there are 4 slots and you shouldn't be penalised if you haven't got a parish or residents' association that meets a certain criteria to represent you. Well, hang on. I was asked if there was an amendment I would like to table. I'm tabling it. If we're minded to just throw it out anyway, that's fine, but the Chair has asked me to put my amendment forward, and I'm doing so.
So what I think you're suggesting is that there are 4 speaking slots, and that where one of those parties may not exist, that slot is available for another. That's, I think, in essence... Yeah? With a hand up, does that have support or not? I would say with the caveat of Chairman's discretion.
What about,
Yeah. So the Chairman would have the discretion to allow the 4th slot to be taken by another suitable party if all 4 as written don't exist. Okay, so that I think was accepted. Go on, see if I can push it then.
Right, second amendment, Chairman, was to stipulate that each speaker must register their intention to speak 48 hours before the start of the meeting does not apply to members of this council.
I think we've thrown it out lock, stock and barrel. Yes, if I'm understanding, yeah, that's gone. Yes.
All we've done is introduce some flexibility into the system.
Councillor Willis, quick one.
I didn't vote on the last amendment because I didn't understand something, and I need to ask, did we vote 1 ward member? Because I don't support that.
No, they've been substantially knocked out, but what we were just really is supporting Chairman's discretion to allow, if there are normally 4 slots, for them all to be occupied by suitable representations, which is what happens. But it just made clear that in that dual parish or incompletely parished area there was an accommodation. Mr. Jarman.
Yeah, apologies, councillors. Are we saying that what can happen is that there's lots of visiting members, and as I understand it, there's absolutely no limit to the number of visiting members? Are we saying that just carries on?
Yeah, yes,
yeah? Okay.
As it stands.
All right.
Technically, we would have to change the council's constitution to prevent that, and I don't see any appetite for that.
On that matter, the urgent update relates to authorising the monitoring officer to introduce amendments to the constitution at the next full council, as such as may be required by our decisions this evening. Okay, so if that occurred, then that amendment comes in. I think we're at 6. No, we're at B. Sorry, wishful thinking. So I don't think we want to put a finite restriction here. Is that a no? No. So, Mrs. Prendergast, then Mrs. Springett.
Thank you. With the amendment, the caveat that goes to democracy, to change the constitution to say that it is recommended that all agendas begin with the chairman assumes that members have read the agenda, and then we keep the presentation really short.
It is suggested to me that that's actually an operation matter and probably doesn't need a constitutional change. So we'll ask for a comment from Democracy team via our clerk to see, and then we'll feed back at the next meeting.
We have begun to move that way already. Mr. Timms and others have already started doing that.
Okay, right. So that's in hand. Councillor Mrs Sprigg, did you want to say anything further?
No, I just wanted to say that I do support, in general, shorter officer presentations. Not necessarily 5 minutes, but a reduction in the officer presentations.
No,
I
so we
don't know how we
support
take
it,
that.
but we don't specifically want to set a limit. We're at C, committee member debate. No longer than 3 minutes. I don't think we supported this. So put your hands up, no. Okay, that wasn't necessarily unanimous, are there? All right, I'll get grief from the legal officer if we don't actually have some sort of, but right. Where did we get to? Committee member debate. So D, late representations. Yes. So any new rate received up to 24 hours. Yes. Right, that's quite clear. Reduce the size of the planning committee. Right, so there's a specific on the papers from 13 to 11. Those in favour of that? Those against? Right. For the sake of clarity, I think that was 3 the first time and the balance the second time and no abstentions. So that's lost. F, planning committee in the afternoon. So in broad terms, it's a principle of daytime meeting for the planning committee. Yes or no? So those who say no, please indicate. Those who say yes. Is there an abstention in there somewhere? Yep. All right, that's lost. So, well, let's record that formally. 6, I believe, is a no. Yeah. 6 was a no, not pursuing that recommendation of putting a restriction on what they could do. That was unanimous, I believe. 7, streamlining committee. We support concise reports, but we don't want an absolute limit, do we? No? Hands up for no, just so it's recorded. Right, that's that dealt with. So that's the part 2, the number 2 recommendation in 7 pieces is dealt with. We've been doing 2 1/4 hours. Would you like to take a very brief break, or do you want to just plough ahead? Right, we'll take a 10-minute pause and then come back and crack on. Okay, adjourned for 10 minutes. Members, I think we're approaching time to reconvene, please. Okay, thank you for returning, members. We reconvene the meeting at this time. I'll note for the record that Councillor English has had to leave for another engagement. And we're back to the same agenda item 17. The next thing that we need to look at is actually the recommendation 1, which relates to the 27 recommendations, which are essentially operational. I know Councillor Mumford has indicated that he's got a couple of things that he would like to mention. So shall I go straight to you, Councillor Mumford? And,
yeah, page 57, 58. The top of page 57, would the officers like to explain to me what that means? Because there seems to be a positive and a negative by underlining all users. I'm confused on what that statement says. I know in this chamber we have argued and agreed that it will not be forced on parish councils, a paperless system. So could you explain that one?
Can I take that straight to Mr. Cornell for an answer?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Not proposing to make any changes to the parish arrangements. I think we've done that one before.
Happy with that. I hope that's what, because my grammar's not probably as good as what yours is, but to me, underlining all users, parish councillor would be included in that. And the second one, page 58, the second one down, they're talking about implementing programmes with parishes, forums, etc. It already exists in the parish service scheme. Unless I've missed it, the parish service scheme is something where you contribute to the parish councils in place of concurrent function funding. It comes in the form of parish service scheme. I don't see how parish service scheme satisfies the first paragraph.
Well, not intending to introduce anything new around this topic.
Are you satisfied with that, Councillor, or do you just want to know what it means?
No, the recommendation is to enable parishes to highlight specific issues and problems for discussion. That's how it ends. This already exists in the form of the parish service scheme. The parish service scheme is funding to the parishes where you've got concurrent functions. It does nothing to do with highlighting specific issues.
Is that meant to say parish charter in that second column?
I didn't write.
Mr. Cornell, does that...
It's not something I've really looked at in any great detail. It says not applicable. I would just strike a line.
So I think on that matter and the one you raised previously, I'll just ask that the clerk minutes that we've got the assurance that the paperless working for parishes is not intended, and that the committee queried whether it meant parish service scheme and perhaps parish charter was intended. So if we minute that, I'm hoping that just covers your two concerns. I'm hoping that the committee recognised this broadly to be operational matters, and the recommendation is purely asking us to note on that basis. Councillor Mrs Prendergast, you are indicating, did you want to let you just come in quickly?
Just very briefly for Mr Cornell, just again under staff and managers, and I know here on page 59 we talk about focused, dedicated team to be working on the backlog of Gypsy and Traveller applications. I know when the IEZ transformation was first announced, there was some talk that the recommendation was that all Gypsy and Traveller work, particularly enforcement, retrospective applications, should sit within the community partnership team. Is that still the intention? Because it's not clear from here. I only ask because in recent months I've had, I've always got reason to work with them, but I've been working across the both, and they seem to be there seems to be a natural fit there, and I just wondered if that was being carried forward. I've been working with a dedicated person in charge of looking at enforcement issues on that, plus the community protection team, and there is such a crossover that it's made sense for me personally as a member to have them sort of close by, or would do if they were close by.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the intention, that where cases become more complex and have different facets to them, that they will also move across to that specialist team. In terms of the other points made in here about how the backlog would be cleared, I think it was done by a number of different measures. We've had consultants in that have done some of the applications, others have been spread across the rest of the team, and the backlog is substantially removed now.
I'm just really thinking about the substantial increase in appeals in that area, that we've got public inquiries, enforcement appeals, planning appeals, that they seem to be coming out of our ears in that particular area. So I just wondered, if they were going to be sitting together. But I think you've answered that. Thanks.
Thank you. Members, can we agree to note the 27 recommendations? Noted. Thank you. There's a third recommendation from the urgent update. I'll move it from the Chair that the monitoring officer be instructed to amend the Constitution to reflect the changes agreed by this committee effective from the new municipal year 2018-19. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Cox, I think you were there. Those in favour? That's unanimous, therefore carried, and that dispatches that item from the agenda. Thank you all. We'll move swiftly on. Save the best till last. Parking innovation. Mr. Kitson, are you going to lead?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chairman. This report provides members with an overview of current and developing technologies in the parking industry, and it outlines the planned innovation within parking services over the next 2 years. Parking services development is actually over 3 phases within the report. Much of phase 1 is already complete, showing some significant savings across some contracts, civil parking enforcement contract being one, where that's a saving of £25,000 per annum. But there are a couple of, quite a few things I'd like to just highlight within the report, because I think provide some context. Industry experts have stated that over the next 5 to 10 years, vehicle transport would change more than it has in the last 100 years. Electric vehicle car ownership is predicted to increase to 10% by 2020. In fact, reading only today, some areas within the industry believe that we're already at that point, and it is growing very rapidly. This growth, as I say, is expected to continue as more manufacturers move their supply from petrol and diesel to electric car production. Combustion engines will no longer be manufactured from 2040, and even earlier still in Scotland, 2032. Couple that with smartphones, in-car technology, connectivity, they've also seen unparalleled growth in recent times. 96% of the population use debit cards, 60% use credit cards, and there's been huge increases in near-field communication payments in recent times. This is where, more often than not, coffee shops and things where you would buy a coffee and you literally just offer your card up to the payment. 76% of adults own a smartphone, and this change in the market will, of course, require us to evolve our parking infrastructure and embrace innovation to meet this change in demand. In recent years, parking services have seen a surge in parking technology aimed at improving the customer experience. However, until now, these systems have not been integrated, and often they've been provided as just standalone solutions. So with advances in smartphone apps and digital transformation, our customers expect services to provide good integration with current technology. Lastly, really, in this aspect, nationally, this expectation has influenced the market, where we have identified significant improvements in technology convergence driven by the needs of our customers. Systems, of course, are now integrated, as explained within the report, and these can actually provide seamless and reliable services, whilst, of course, contributing to improved business efficiency. One of the phases within the report where we were talking about the potential of emissions banding, so for electric vehicles, there could well be cheaper tariffs in the future within the car parks, and for less clean vehicles, then there is the possibility of changing the tariff for those vehicles. We're currently working on that, and no doubt in the future we'll be bringing future reports to you about how we can take that forward. But currently that's set for phase 3, but we might be able to bring that in a bit earlier. So the recommendation is that the proposals to develop parking services and embrace innovation be noted. The report also provides a summary of town centre car parking charges, pay and display charges, which were a deferred decision from the last committee meeting on the 22nd of January. Currently, the pay and display tariff structure is broadly consistent across all car parks and does not consider a variable tariff structure based on location or demand. Other than a few exceptions of King Street and Palace Avenue, of course, where there is significantly high turnover. As a result, parking availability within central car parks, close to town centre amenities, is limited, and this was supported by WSP's work as part of the tri-study. And of course that leads to drivers hunting between car parks for spaces, particularly at peak times. Although future technology will help reduce this, the current banding places stress on the parking spaces available at central locations when there's capacity within our other outer car parks and indeed park and ride. I've made a couple of references in here to the integrated transport strategy where it was obviously recognised of this difficulty, where the recommendation was that we should look to review the pricing structure of the car parks in Maidstone Town Centre through the introduction of dynamic car park charging. The strategy also said that review should establish what measures might be introduced to encourage parking into the larger edge centre car parks, and of course this was carried out by WSP as part of the trial study more recently. So the recommendation in this aspect is that the committee agrees the pay and display tariff proposals as set out in Appendix 1 to promote migration to high demand car parks in the town centre, to outer zone car parks and park and ride. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kitson.
Mr. Kitson, you did say to me that you were going to be assuring me in your report that the tariff for the long stay car parks, where people will buy a season ticket, will remain a comparable rate to encourage people to use park and ride. So I was expecting that, and I was on your every word, but I didn't hear it.
My apologies, Councillor Cox, that it wasn't within the report, but it's been very much work in process since the last meeting. I perfectly understand the reason why you'd be interested in season tickets, because the report is talking about a balance in pay and display structure across car parks, and of course season tickets will be part of that. Something I did mention very briefly at the last meeting, when compared to the thousands of transactions each day within the pay and display car parks, season tickets represent a very small proportion, albeit important proportion. There are only 252 season tickets live currently. But when you look at the different types of season tickets, of course there will be variable prices because some are 3 months, some are 6 months, some are 12 months. But after looking through the studies and balancing the price of the permit against each working day, the average cost is £4.24 per day for a season ticket holder, and therefore that's comparable to the new park and ride tariff of £2.50 per day, or should I say favourable in terms that it will help people support park and ride. And of course, it also provides some discount for those people that still prefer to use season tickets.
That's a very clever answer, but over to you again, Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. I think those figures would show, and I hope we don't see a massive surge for people buying these in advance and seeing what they can save on their daily parking. But what it does show is that the proposed park and ride scheme, being a maximum of £3 for up to 5 people in that car, will show that even the bulk buying of parking within Maidstone would say that moving to park and ride is more favourable at this point. Would you say that's correct?
What I would say is that it's, first of all, the decision was for £2.50 to pay to park for park and ride, up to five passengers. So that makes park and ride a very competitive offer. In terms of whether people would move across to season tickets, I think it's very difficult to say. If people do move across to season tickets, we would know quite early, because we're very, very closely monitoring not just the proposals in this report as far as moving people from the high demand car parks to the outer car parks, but indeed to park and ride also, and whether there's any migration across to season tickets.
So, sorry, can you clarify then that the result that we've ended up with park and ride, pay to park or whatever, it was not a maximum of £3. That was proven to not work. I must have missed that in looking back at the minutes. So it is just a £2.50 flat fee up to 5 people. We weren't confusing the issue as I thought we were. The second person in the car was 50p, making it £3.
No, that wasn't a decision at the end. That may well have been part of the discussions, but it was certainly £2.50 pay to park all day for up to 5 passengers. Sorry, for a driver, and up to 4 passengers, clearly.
Which is why I suspect there will be a big hole in that park and ride budget outcome. And I, for one, do not support using car park income to subsidise that service further. And I think your season ticket comment's interesting, because the cheapest season ticket for the 12-month period or whatever, I think it works out about £3 something a day. And you can park up to 7 people for that price in a 7-seater car. So, you know, there are comparisons to make with the affordability of park and ride. Now, let me tell you why I'm really nervous about using car park charges to move people around. I think we heard in the report that we see technology coming into play in our car parks, and I 100% really appreciate all the work the officers have done to look at that and set us out a path ahead of where we're going to go. One of the things will be the ability to indicate where there is available space, which will allow a motorist to efficiently make a journey to that available space, and avoiding this phenomenon that I think you're referring to as hunting, where car parks reach capacity. Of course, if we're using price to encourage them to seek an alternative car park, we're actually encouraging hunting in the short term. Hopefully there will be space there, because we're identifying the car parks that have currently the lower occupancy. But at the moment, I would suggest that the motorist's habit is to drive to the nearest, most conveniently accessed car park. But what we actually want them to do is not do that, probably go a little further. And I think we heard in the report that the greatest demand is over on the north-east side of the town. And there's an implication then that perhaps we would naturally be moving those people to perhaps the car parks like Palace Avenue, where there is capacity, perhaps. So there's a question of where we anticipate they will dislodge to.
Just to confirm, Palace Avenue was one of the prime car park locations, and so that's a good example of where we'll be looking to move people out. In terms of hunting, we are talking about those car parks in the North East that are under demand, but WSP certainly weren't talking about them being at capacity, so there is still capacity within those car parks.
But we're going to use price to encourage them not to use some of them. So an unnecessary displacement, which must imply a further distance of car journey, possibly encountering the one-way system where the congestion is worse. So I'm really nervous about using price to encourage people to not use the car park that is nearest and most convenient, least minutes spent in the car, least minutes causing congestion, least pollution miles driven. So I'm really nervous about that. I'm just going to go back to the technology part of the report, and I welcome everything here. And it, to me, it inevitably says there'll be some remodelling of the car parks. There'll be some structural changes, some infrastructure to go in. And I do hope we will also take that as an opportunity to look at improving the car parks. That might be a bit of greenery wherever we can introduce it. It might be some improvements to low-level nighttime lighting as well, with a view to making them more hospitable and the perception of safety in the car park. So, I'd like perhaps whether we add that as another line in the recommendation, but I'd ask officers to embrace that opportunity to review that from a green point of view and a safety lighting point of view. So there's others indicating I'm not in favour of increasing the car park charges for the reason I've said. I'm going to go anti-clockwise. Councillor Matt Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually really sceptical that changing parking charges by actually quite modest amounts will achieve the displacement effect that we're looking for anyway. And it takes me back to a principle that I learnt in AS Economics, which is that we're assuming here every person who parks in the town centre is a rational economic agent with perfect access to all of the information in front of us, which is simply not the case in most scenarios. So we're sitting here looking at the grid of parking charges and going, well, actually, I want to save a bit of money, so I will park here instead. I think one of the biggest issues that we have in terms of moving people around the town centre to the car parks we like is a lot of people don't always know where the parking spaces are. So there's an information dissemination issue there. And then I also think there's the rational agency issue here is, are people going to park half a mile further away from the shop they want to go to because it will save them 20p or 30p for each hour that they're there? I'm really sceptical that it will achieve the benefit. So I'm looking at this from a, do I think it's reasonable to up the parking charges, aside from the do we move people around or not? Sceptical that will happen. And I think there's always a danger when you do this because, and I've said this before in briefings and meetings, we have a really big retail area that we all know of, not too far from here, that offers free parking and Tesla charging points and all the rest of it. So there's always a danger with doing that. But then you look at the most expensive privately owned car park in our town centre at Frimling's Walk, and every Saturday that place is full. So I'm actually thinking, well, maybe there is an argument for raising these, aside from the displacement issue, just to say, actually, do you know what? We're offering perhaps more than we need to here.
Councillor Mumford.
No, it's going. Oh, right, I've got that one anyway. The only bit, I would agree what Councillor Burton's just said. My point was, I read with glee on page 72 about intelligent tariffs. And one of our great concerns, or residents' concern, is like air quality and traffic. and here is an opportunity to try and improve the air quality, but I notice that intelligent tariffs are not going to be looked at until phase 3, or after phase 3, which is 2020, 2 years' time. And I was quite disappointed to see that the opportunity to improve the air quality was there in technology, and we weren't taking advantage of it for 2 years. Can you tell me why?
Certainly. As you would see within the report, there are many different innovations within the 3 phases, which is, of course, labour intensive. It's already very demanding for the team to achieve all these things. We're confident we can do it, but demanding nevertheless. So therefore, these other innovations, we were talking about considering these beyond phase 3. That being said, I do understand the importance, particularly after hearing the earlier report about air quality, and so we're very happy to make a commitment to try and bring that research and proposals forward earlier, probably within the first 3 phases, rather than leaving it to go beyond.
Thank you. Whatever proposal you make, Mr. Chairman, can we include that offer within that proposal?
Support of accelerating the process wherever possible. Councillor Wilby.
Thanks, Chairman. One, again, I agree with... sorry, I'm going to come here first. Matt, yes. About this, whether we actually agree where this money goes, that we should actually look at increasing. I think we've brought this up many a time in previous meetings about our parking charges being way too low. The only thing I want to ask is about the charging points. I see a number on page 72, about 14, the cost of £6,720 least. So is it only 14 we're planning to put in on phase 2, or is there more going in? Was that how many we've got in now? Or?
The charges for about leasing, they're sort of investigatory charges where we've had a chat to the market about what the charges would be. We were thinking about leasing rather than purchasing because the market is changing weekly, and we're confident that as we work through the phases and we start to look at the growing electric vehicle charging points, that we're likely to move away from the types that we start with. So we're looking to lease rather than purchase, and of course always get the best deal possible.
And it's just 14 you're planning for, first of all?
Yes, it was just 14. Within those locations within the report, again, closely monitor usage and then look to try and extend that. The thought process there is that by placing them in some of those car parks, particularly within residential areas, it also allows residents to consider the options of electric vehicles where currently they may not have opportunity to charge, so they can charge within the car park overnight or part of the evening at least.
The only thing I was going to say, I see a lot of smart parking has been put in down at Sandling Road, at that car park. I've had a few residents raise a few issues about the confusion between the free payment system when you actually go in there, actually querying which one they actually have to go to. Obviously, some of us have got tech savvy, but the older generation have apparently been struggling a little bit with that. And I thought the reason for the smart system was to replicate what Fremling Walk kind of gives you, where you go in, you get your ticket, you don't have to worry about going to the ticket machine, putting your registration in and coming away, because that's a bit of a faff to tell you the truth. You want to be able to go in, put your ticket in, or get your ticket, go to the shop, then worry about paying for your ticket afterwards. It seems like we've just duplicated the ticket system all over again, and I don't see the actual advantage of that.
It's fair to say, though, the amount of use that check-in, check-out system has, I think in that car park, 26% of people pay by cash. Everybody else uses the check-in, check-out or the mobile phone service. So, and again, we're seeing that grow. You're right, though, in terms of we don't want to overcomplicate things. I've always said that parking should be very simple. transaction. It shouldn't be complicated. There shouldn't be signs everywhere to explain to people what you need to do. But I guess moving the transition from people buying a pay and display ticket and then presenting it in their car and walking back to the machine or leaving the car park to a system where you don't need to go and place a ticket in the car, a ticketless system, does take quite a bit of signage and quite a bit of education of customers, quite rightly.
So that's my point. There's a machine there that the one actually works out how long you've been there. You have to go to that machine, put your reg in, get a ticket to display in your window, and then when you come back, you then have to go back to the machine and put that in to actually work out your time. I use the mobile app. The mobile app's fine. What I'm saying is, I thought the system we were meant to be putting in there was to be on par with Fremlin Walk kind of parking, not to be. We're duplicating the printing out a bit of paper to put in your car, then come back, get that piece of paper and put it in the machine.
I think you raise a good example of us not presenting the way the machine works as well as we could. The reality is a customer will go into the car park, they would use the terminal by put their registration number in, put their card against the machine, it'll start their parking transaction. It's ticketless. They don't need to go back and place it in their car.
Microphone.
Because I went down there because I got a complaint about it, and it actually says you need to put the ticket. It does on the thing, on the sign. So that's why I'm raising it. So that's fine. As long as you can do that, I can actually go back to my resident and actually say about it. So I just thought I'd ask the question. Thank you.
Can I just say, just one by way of assurance, I'll go down there tomorrow and make sure that any signage that suggests you need to put a ticket in your car is removed, because, as you say, that isn't the spirit of what we're trying to achieve. So.
Thank you. I'm intrigued by a comment you did make there where you said that we'd said that parking charges were way too low. Because when we agreed fees and charges recently, I don't think we did. We actually agreed the fees and charges for the car parks for the year, and now we're looking at changing them again.
I actually believe it's you, Chairman, who actually raised in previous meetings that our parking is too low. I don't think there was obviously the group feeling of that putting them
It's
up.
very competitive, and that's how we get our customers. There is scope to move it up, but this is presented to us as change the pricing to create an effect, and I don't agree with that principle. That's not to say there isn't scope to look at what we charge in the future, but it's decoupling those two. That's just my personal position.
I do agree with you. I don't believe that we should punish people in one sense and try and force them out. Basically, we should have our set prices.
But that's the reason on the papers tonight is change the prices to create an effect of displacement, one form or another. Councillor Wiss.
Excellent report from a technology point of view, and the detail you've gone into. Obviously, a lot of work's been done. Sorry if I've not read this properly and not understood, but is recommendation 1 separate from recommendation 2? I.e., do you need recommendation 2 to pay for the technology for recommendation 1?
The recommendations are independent. As I say, one is for noting only. The report does detail that all these innovations are already funded through the Civil Parking Enforcement Fund.
I've got 3 technical questions, and it's not. Can I reserve the right on to come back on the parking charges? But can I just ask some things about the thing that we seem to have some agreement on to try and get them nuanced? You've talked about how to pay, how we'll tell people where they can park. The Chairman mentioned that technology. I think it is mentioned in the report. How will people know where the best place to park is? Will that improve?
It all starts with the introduction of a cashless-only car park. The way these systems work is if it's cashless-only, we can identify through an app how many people have purchased a ticket at what tariff. We know how many spaces are in the car park, so that will give us a real-time indication of how many spaces are available in the car park. You multiply that up now to all car parks, which is where eventually we'd like to roll it out to. It then gives us the ability to have app technology that would tell us the current live occupancy within each of the car parks. Just to extend from that, our supplier, which is Ringo, are currently working, developing a system called Park Now, which has actually just gone live. And that's introduced currently into all brand new BMWs. And so all brand new BMWs, as an example, would link into all of our car parks and show current levels of occupancy. That's just a starting point. We'll be looking to grow that as we move forwards.
Can that information be relayed for people that don't use the app via information boards like you see in other towns? Medway, is it? Gravesend, I think, even does.
I can't say that's the plan. Those information boards are very expensive to maintain. KCC, you may notice the ones that are already there. They're very expensive to maintain. That's not what we would suggest. I think the market is, everything is directing towards smartphone technology and in-car, more importantly, in-car technology development. And so all these things are going to be interlinked. What I would say, though, is much of it is going to be dependent on what we do with the cashless-only car park, and then we can just see how that model translates. And no doubt I'll be feeding back to this committee on the success of that.
Okay, so next question is that bringing this in, I'm always concerned. I understand about technology moving forward, and it is, but there's still, with public transport or private transport, there's an element of people that want to still use cash. And I understand smart cards, how they've been taken to contactless, near-field readers. Of people like the technology, it's working. You can see you've tested it somewhere and it's working. Have you considered about keeping cash for a period of time? I know it's phase 3, I think, where we get rid of cash next year. If we were to do that. Is there any way we can keep cash? That's what I'm trying to ask.
I certainly feel for the foreseeable future, cash, we're not going to be able to get rid of cash. So there are a group of folk that still like to use cash. Even when we're using the cashless-only example, we'll be pointing people in that car park to car parks nearby where we'd still be accepting cash, of course. I'm not suggesting that all car parks will go cashless. Certainly within the time frame of this report over the next 2 years, probably not in the next 5, I would have thought.
Okay, and the last point on technology, that's a good answer. I think that gives people we can explain you can still park here with cash, is about information. But the last question is on charging points, and I think I welcome the fact this is a quick reaction to the environmental strategy, I suppose. As far as charging points are concerned, 2 things. One, have you looked at, will we costing people money to charge? Is that the model we're looking at? So we charge them to charge, or is it going to be you charge it for free because you bought your car but you paid to park? And the second question is, sorry if I'm a bit pointy with officers about things, I sell leasing. Could you also look at cash price against leasing? You might find for technology like that there may be no benefit in leasing. Unless you make a higher rate and return, my understanding of leasing is it's not really worth doing, unless someone does a discounted lease.
First of all, in terms of leasing, if your suggestion is there are other options, we will review those, and we will just to see where we are with them. In terms of the first part of your question, perhaps I could defer to Alex.
Sorry. On charging, the model you're using, is it you pay to park, and obviously we're starting with a drip feed of charging points. Is it you pay to park and you also pay to charge? Or is it you pay to park and actually the charging will be free? Or have you, actually a third question, have you looked at a model where someone that actually makes money from the charging pays to put the charging points in? So 3 questions, if that's all right.
To answer your question, we've looked at the first 2, not the third. We'd probably initially go for a pay-to-park model because obviously it's easier for people to transition over. But we would be very conscious of monitoring the cost of electricity and the cost that we're paying against the money that we're making in from parking. So obviously if there's a huge imbalance between, say, a couple of pounds in parking and then actually someone charging is costing us up to £5, £6 or double the parking tariff, we may review it. But looking at suppliers, we do have the flexibility to change the way that we price that as we go along, and then it would be a case of re-signing. So I think over a 3-year period, it will give us a pretty clear indicator by monitoring the usage data of which way would be best to go for the public.
Can I just chip in and say that as an EV driver, people driving electric cars expect to pay for their fuel. So the opportunity to charge for electricity shouldn't be missed. They enjoy the benefit of they'll fill their tank for, say, £5 or £6, whereas the diesel car will fill their tank for £50 or £60. But they do expect to pay for their fuel. It's just an observation. Back to you.
So, yeah, I wasn't advocating not paying, but it does encourage, but it's a fair, good. But, so therefore, sorry again, I'm being pointy and annoying, but in the technology you look at, please ask the question, can we, if you want to charge for charging, will the technology you've got for paying for parking also enable you to pay for charging to charging? Does that make sense? As in, will what you buy, or rent, or lease, or whatever, will it enable, if we decide to charge for charging, like the chairman's suggesting he feels is a good idea, will the technology you have for swiping your card and using that allow you to pay for the electricity as well? Saving you in having to change something in the future.
Any payment system for pay to park is more likely to be app-based, so there won't be contactless transactions, most likely. It does depend on what system we go for, because there are some that do still use the contactless club cards, but the shift seems to be towards app usage just for the sake of ease. So it would be similar to the cashless parking system that we have, but likely separate from it unless there's any integration in the future.
Do you mind if I just add to that? Of course, the other technology we're looking at is, because everything's vehicle registration number based, it will very quickly tie into a DVLA database, and if we decide to charge for electric vehicles, then equally that could tie into you know, once you put the registration number in, it could tie into a charging structure. So all these things actually come part of that environmental tariff, call it what you will. But we could look at that as part of that development, I think we said in phase 3 now.
What fun. Good work. Chair, can I reserve my right to come back on the parking charges if necessary?
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, I think anything to do with this technology, we have this temptation to think about now and what we know now, and it's obvious you want those big boards as you drive along that are all LED lit up saying there's 5 parking spaces around the corner. But the technology moves so fast, you won't even think, you know, the car will know where the parking space is. It will take you there. It's...
Doris, your key voter in Marden, Doris, she may not have it. So we've got to give them a transition period.
Doris is the one that benefits most. You know, where you've got a rural isolation and immobility, and actually where this technology actually allows them to make journeys that they wouldn't be able to make now because there is no bus, because they can't afford a taxi, whatever. You know, it's 5 years and it's 10 years, but the rate of change is enormously fast. I always quote this thing that technology, as a rule of thumb, doubles every 4 years. Councillor Matt Burton takes exception with me saying that because he struggled. He said you've got nothing to substantiate that, so he researched it and he found something to substantiate it, and I'm very grateful to him for doing so. But anyway, let's move on. The technology moves really fast. Don't think about what's possible today. Expect it to do it effortlessly, painlessly, and well tomorrow.
That's your view. I understand technology, but my view is I don't want to leave people in isolation. And I think rushing ahead with technology, sometimes you forget the people, that Doris from Marden, that doesn't have access to that. I know what you're talking about, and I'll work with you on it, but I just think we need to think of people that cashless, the cash examples, where they may not have it. Yeah.
Right. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that what you said about making sure that we don't forget the quality of our car parks, that they are well lit, that they are a decent place to come back to, and you feel safe, and also that they are being landscaped. And I think the one at opposite Boots is a very good example of that, and I think we need to hold that up. You've said that the two of these recommendations aren't linked. Obviously, I can see that the need to move forward and to develop our parking services by what I've just said, this endorses that. So one is definitely separate. However, what I'd like to hear is, because I can add up, if we're heading to us not accepting these figures and the rises, what is that going to do to the proposal that has come from the previous meeting to implement the change to park and ride to pay to park?
For me, the recommendation at the last meeting, as I recall, was set at £2.50 a day, as we say, pay to park. There was a question over funding those differences, and the suggestion was that the money raised from pay and display tariff increases could help support that. That being said, what this report is very clearly talking about is moving and migrating and controlling supply and demand effectively within the car park. It does also, though, highlight that it could generate £198,000 worth of additional income. It doesn't actually affect the proposals in the report.
It is my recollection
Thank
that
you very much.
the motion that Councillor Mumford put to the last meeting was a cost neutral on the status quo scenario. We removed the additional frequency to bring the cost in line with what is currently budgeted for, is my recollection. So we don't need, if what officers presented comes true, additional money to fund the park and ride.
Mr. Chairman, I thought that the additional extension of time, off the top of my head, was an extra 34,000. I didn't think that it was that much of a saving, but I'm a bit mystified that
we removed the 153 or whatever £1,000 cost to bring it down in line. That is my recollection.
What we did do was take the increase in frequency out of it, and we took option 4. That increase in frequency was 150 odd grand, and like you quite rightly say, the other one was 32 grand, which we left in there, which was the extension of time. And I think option 4, if I recollect, is pay to park. And so it wasn't quite status quo when you get a pocket calculator out, but it was as near as I could get it.
Mr. Cornell.
Yeah, just to try and help hopefully on this one. In going to a pay-to-park model, it has introduced a high level of volatility on the income stream because we don't have that surety of income from the concessionary fares that we had previously. So I think that, you know, it's a little bit more precarious now than it was. Potential upside, but volatility.
But that was the decision members took. Can I suggest we dispatch item 1, because I think that's quite easy. So perhaps from the chair I can move that the proposals to develop parking services and embrace innovation be supported, a bit stronger than noted, supported, and that committee requests that all measures to accelerate implementation be considered, and that the committee further request that as infrastructure is installed, opportunities for landscaping, greening and improving of safety lighting be considered. Yeah, seconded by Councillor Cox. Councillor Mumford, would you like to speak?
Yes, we got a commitment to bring forward the intelligent tariffs carbon metered parking. Do you feel that you've covered that sufficiently?
Well, my words are deliberately aimed to do that, so anything that can be done to accelerate any part of this is what we're asking for, but it's obviously down to what officers can realistically achieve, but you know, all aspects be brought forward as the earliest opportunity, including the one that you particularly highlighted. So can I take that to the vote? Those in favour, please? Item 1, That's unanimous, therefore carried. I think we should note for the minutes that Councillor Mrs Springett has left the meeting before that vote. She had another commitment to attend to. So now we're left with item 2. And this is, do we put the parking charges up or not? Councillor Matt Burton and then Councillor Mrs Springett. Do you want to give us some additional information at the moment? Yeah.
If that's okay, yes. It was just a quick point on, I've heard a lot of people who, rightly so, because it is their opinion, but obviously not too confident in the ability for a change in tariffs to cause a modal shift in itself. That's fine, but the one other bit of information I would like to tease out, because obviously it's not being carried out independently of other things, is that as part of the implementation of the new Park and Ride, or the pay-to-park structure for Park and Ride, we are working with the Council's communications team to quite heavily push on the marketing of the service to try and increase the user base, especially to, and with social media as well. So there's going to be a lot of attention brought to it, which will hopefully, in line with tariff increases, generate some interest for the service and cause a level of migration. But the tariffs weren't being considered independently as a huge draw or a huge stick. We're trying to give stick and carrot to provide the best to the customers.
Totally support the carrot element of that. Make people aware of the service that exists and encourage them to use it. Thank you. Councillor Matt Burton, then Councillor Mrs Prendergast.
Thank you, Chairman. The technology doubling thing you were talking about earlier is actually called Moore's Law, and it refers to the doubling of the transistor count per chip. So there we go. That's an aside.
Which broadly supports what I'm saying. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd also like to challenge something else you said earlier, which was you seem to intimate that because the rationale that leads us to this parking charge structure that's put in front of us is to promote migration between car parks and to support the increase in demand for Park and Ride, that by voting for it, we are intimating a support for that. Now, I've already made my feelings quite clear, I think, both in the past in terms of the fact that I don't particularly agree with Park and Ride as it currently exists, and also here with my scepticism about this scheme's ability to achieve the migration that we're looking for. So, but I do think that there is scope and good reason for us to implement this parking charges tariff anyway, because we undervalue our parking compared to our competitors in the town. So I would actually like to move an amendment to recommendation 2, that simply cuts out everything after the words Appendix 1.
Seconded.
That's moved and seconded. So, as I understand it, what we're saying is we're going to put, or you're suggesting we put the parking charges up because we can.
We put the parking charges up because this issue in isolation, I personally believe that we should. There is a logic to the parking structure that's been put in front of us. It does actually highlight some of the illogical parking tariffs that we were charging previously anyway. What I'm doing is making it perhaps more appeasing to members who disagree with the principles that are behind it. But I think there is a valid set of reasons for implementing this charging structure that sit behind this.
Bear with me a moment, I'm just checking a technical point. It's real just fine-tuning, but as you moved that motion, but with be agreed on the end of it, if you cut the whole of that.
Yes, yeah, sorry, yeah.
So
technical clarification.
Non-contentious,
yeah.
but you accept that amendment. Your
Absolutely.
seconder does too, I'm quite sure. I think we simply take this to the vote. Yeah. No.
So it reads in full that the pay and display tariff proposals as set out in Appendix 1 be agreed. Yeah?
Councillor Willis.
Could we just ask for an officer's view on that, possibly from Mr. Cornwall?
I think you need to put a question.
So, Mr. Cornwall, will that enable the change in parking behaviour we're looking for, and as in the zones and things? Do you feel that will enable that?
Well, thank you. I think if we're going to run a park and ride service, it has to be considerably cheaper than parking in the town centre. It's just basic, so it's going to help, isn't it?
Final word, then we're going to move to a vote, I think.
Yeah, if I may very quickly, Chairman, just to clarify this, that doesn't mean that voting for what I've put forward here means that everybody has the same scepticism that I have about park and ride or the potential for migration between car parks, but it's just I couldn't vote for it as it currently. I'm trying to make this as open-ended as possible so actually we can achieve the same end goal between us all and be done with it.
Right, I'm not going to be able to support this, but let's take it to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? No abstentions. That motion is carried. Right, that's... that does conclude our business for this evening. Members, officers, thank you for your patience, your contribution, and at times your good humour. And Councillor Wilby, do you want to use the microphone?
Yeah. We said it about the display. I think we've done it a year ago when we done the text, when we said about amending stuff. We actually had the text written up on the screen behind, which was very helpful to all of us. Could we have that come back to the...
I'm advised the display is not functioning currently. Neither are the cameras zooming into the speakers. And I do intend to send Sam an email in the morning inquiring upon progress to remedy that. But yes, if it were working, sure, we could use that. Final word, Councillor Wilby.
Well, if we can't use the screen, can we use the TV? So at least we can turn and actually read them. So.
Yeah, those do work, apparently, if you don't wiggle the wires. But not at JTB meetings. Thank you, everyone. The meeting is now closed.